Sonic Forces is an enigma of a game. On the surface, it's a perfectly functional and fairly polished product. There are no game-breaking bugs to speak of, the performances and animation are of a mostly consistent quality, the visuals are what you'd expect from an 8th generation Sonic title, and the gameplay is even headed by the teams behind Sonic Colors and Generations, two of the highest rated 3D Sonic games of the time. But anyone who's played the game for themselves or has spent any time in the Sonic fandom knows that there's something off about this title. The gameplay has practically no substance, the writing is wildly inconsistent and all over the place, and so much of the hype Forces tries to build up amounts to nothing more than bold-faced lies and crushed dreams. Take Chaos, for example. The main antagonist of Sonic Adventure, many fans saw his introduction as Sonic Team finally caring about interconnected series lore again. But instead of an epic brawl between Sonic and Chaos harkening to the early days of 3D Sonic, we instead got a few cameos in cutscenes. Or what about classic Sonic? Seeing him in trailers, you'd probably expect a fresh take on 2D Sonic movement, taking advantage of that added third dimension. Instead, you'd be disappointed to find flat and uninspired level layouts accompanied by broken physics and momentum. Even the Colors and Generations splash screen is manipulative. The level designers for Forces have never worked on either of those titles, and the only thing connecting it to Colors and Generations is the fact that the employees are all under Sonic Team. All in all, Sonic Forces doesn't care about being a good Sonic game. Now, 7 years later, the bad taste Sonic Forces left in gamers' mouths is still relevant. Even after the resurgence of the Sonic brand with games like Frontiers and Superstars, I still see Sonic Forces brought up in discussions, as if it's only a few months old. The game's attempts to appeal to fans of all eras of Sonic through the marketing equivalent of dangling keys has permanently outed Forces as a disingenuous product, so it will probably never receive a resurgence in popularity like its potentially more broken older brothers. The game has no real ambition, so to speak, and the game will never slip under the radar like other disappointing releases either, because Sonic Forces was the long-awaited return to the boost genre of gameplay that Sonic Generations perfected. Everything was riding on Forces when the Sonic Boom initiative failed spectacularly, and if not for the 2B founders of Evening Star showing Sega up with Sonic Mania, 2017 would have been a wholly disastrous year for the franchise. Mania, in some ways, actually made things slightly worse for Forces by giving fans easy ammo to use against Sonic Team's underwhelming implementation of the classic Sonic formula. But had it never existed, I honestly think Sonic Forces could have killed the franchise, or at the very least, severely crippled the 3D platformers. And with that being said, I actually think Sonic Forces is an underrated gem and that it deserves a solid 7 out of 10. Wait, don't go grabbing your pitchforks just yet. Sonic Forces is what I would call a guilty pleasure of mine. I fully understand the ramifications of Forces and why it's so hated within the Sonic fandom, but I can't bring myself to hate the game. At first I ignored Sonic Forces for a good while, but during an eShop sale in 2018, I bought the game out of morbid curiosity, and I had a fun time. Keep in mind that I was raised on Sonic Lost World for 3DS. I fucking ate this shit up as a kid. I thought the Deadly Six were cold as hell. Needless to say, I was naive. And because Sonic Forces was an improvement over this, I came to the conclusion that the game was simply overhated. To this day, I still make an effort to replay Sonic Forces at least once or twice a year because I miss being young and being able to enjoy a game without subconsciously analyzing and criticizing every aspect of it. Sonic Forces was the last game I owned where I could shut off my brain and consume the output of mindless slop without feeling guilty or frustrated for having wasted my time. At least it was for a time. With the release of the fan-made mod Sonic Forces Overclocked, I just had to sink more money into Sonic Forces. And I had a great time with Overclocked. Of course, the highlight is the collection of more difficult and substantive levels, complete with original gameplay gimmicks. But I was shocked to see it also includes a brand new narrative with full voice acting, a new OST, and cutscenes to boot. Hell, they even repurposed episode Shadow to give Metal Sonic his own prequel level. Playing Overclocked feels like walking into an alternate universe where Forces had that ambition that so many Sonic fans praised the series' black sheep for. That being said, playing Overclocked made me realize that even the bad games that lack ambition have hidden potential and promising concepts that Sonic fans are exceptionally talented at bringing out. But seeing the sheer amount of talent the fans have poured into Forces made me wonder, do I even like Sonic Forces as a product, or am I a contrarian at heart, holding on to what I perceive to be the unpopular opinion simply because I believe I'm a more interesting person for doing so? After all, I do find joy in reminding people that I enjoyed Sonic Forces more than Colors, and entertaining the possibility that Forces is not inherently the worst Boost-style gameplay. Speaking of Sonic Colors, I often find myself rewatching my old video on the various versions of it. I think out of everything I published under the Lubba Fanatic brand of video game retrospectives, I'm most proud of that video, which I find to be ironic because I often associate it with a low production value and rushed ending, but that's besides the point. I mention this because I often wonder if I handled that video's ending with grace. The point I tried to get across was that it's okay to switch up on a game after release, because our first impressions aren't always accurate. Though sometimes I worry the point came across as me dismissing criticism of the Sonic series by telling fans they just need to replay games they already know they dislike just to see if they find a new, more positive angle to view them at. In all honesty, this is probably just my anxiety talking. I don't think anyone would ever see me as a voice in the Sonic fandom to be reckoned with, especially because I was pushing this channel as Nintendo-centric before unfortunate circumstances forced me to take an extended hiatus. Regardless, I've come to terms with one fact. I won't feel contempt with blindly enjoying Sonic Forces until I tear this game apart. So, let's jump right into my biggest video project of all time. A massive, in-depth analysis and deconstruction of the story and gameplay of Sonic Forces. Let's see if I can finally decipher my complicated case of Stockholm Syndrome after all these years.
Until the battle's won. No one's gonna get something to us. Into each other we put our trust. Standing united after the fight. It's a brand new day. We have turned the page. Never knew how much I needed somebody to help me this way.
Welcome to the Sonic Boost Retrospective, a series in which I aim to review every mainline 3D Sonic game modeled after the daytime stages found in Sonic Unleashed. This includes the console games and their various remakes and remasters, but not any handheld exclusives or mobile games. Sorry Dream Team, get yourself an Android port and maybe we'll talk. So far we've covered all three versions of Sonic Colors. That leaves us with Sonic Unleashed, Generations, Forces, Frontiers, and the upcoming Sonic X Shadow Generations. This second video will of course cover Sonic Forces. Before we dive into this game though, I wanted to spend some time to go over mistakes I made in my Colors video, context behind the making of this video, and the recent rebrand of this channel. First, I made a few embarrassing blunders when researching for my Sonic Colors video. When discussing Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, I claimed that the game was intended to be a reboot for the Sonic series. This common talking point is based on an unsubstantiated claim made by Wikipedia, with the only citations being articles made by video game news publications who were obviously not involved in the making of Sonic 06. I ended up parroting this line, blindly accepting it as fact, when covering the Sonic series up to Colors. Though it is worth mentioning that Ian Flynn at one point referred to 06 as a failed reboot, so either he is also mistaken or he knows something that the reviewers who merely assumed Sonic 06 is a reboot don't. This was brought to my attention thanks to a thread my mutual made on the subject. Thanks Oomphy. In the very next line, I incorrectly claimed that Sonic 06 has less playable characters than its predecessors. This is because I somehow gaslit myself into believing that the playable roster consisted solely of Sonic, Shadow, and Silver, when in fact the roster actually exceeds that of the Sonic Adventure games when taking support characters into account. Oops. When covering the characters of Sonic Colors, I made a joke about Tails at the expense of writers Ken Pontac and Warren Graff, implying they maliciously sourced online wikis to avoid properly researching the Sonic lore. I believe that misconception came from this Facebook interview from 2013 in which Graff states that he used sources like Wikipedia and YouTube to learn about the series' history. This has led to speculation on whether Sonic Team was failing to provide the writers with sufficient material, or maybe even intentionally gatekeeping that information. But eventually, Graff tweeted in January of this year that Sonic Team was actually willing to give him and Pontac plenty of information regarding series characters. So much so, in fact, that practically every character trait was dictated by Sonic Team, leaving the writers with little creative freedom. What I believe happened is that Sega hired 2 writers without regard for whether they had experience with the Sonic franchise, the writers used external sources to catch up on the history of Sonic, and then Sonic Team wrote the majority of the meta-era scripts themselves. All of the issues I had with Sonic Colors' story can be pinned on Sonic Team for misunderstanding their own characters and letting their overseas writers take the fall for it. Keep that in mind when we cover the story of Sonic Forces, as both games share the same writers. And thanks to Sonic Stadium users SSF1991 and Kuzu for documenting this information in an easy-to-read format. Those are the glaring mistakes that stood out to me when rewatching my Colors video, though of course it's possible that I've missed a couple more. I'm always open to constructive criticism on my videos, as my goal is to make content worth watching, so feel free to leave a comment under that video if you catch anything I didn't. Next, let's talk RoxieProxy. The Webba Fanatic name was always intended to be a placeholder while I came up with something better. Unfortunately, due to real-world circumstances, I was forced to go on an extended hiatus. Behind the scenes, I've invested a lot of time and money into building up my content creation pipeline so I can finally return to a semi-regular upload schedule after years of being away from YouTube. Some of the videos I made to practice visual effects have seen unexpected popularity on this channel, but I hope those of you who found me through those videos will stick around for my real passion, making video game retrospectives. I normally wouldn't do this so as to avoid coming off as disingenuous, but because I've poured months of work into this video, I would truly appreciate it if you shared it around with your friends. Also, like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, you get the drill. I actually think Sonic Forces is an underrated gem, and that engagement helps grow the channel, and I'd love to someday make content like this for a living. Also, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my mutual on Twitter, Diddy, for her amazing work on my new channel avatar. I truly couldn't be happier with the result. It was worth every penny. At the time of recording, I don't believe she is accepting commissions, but I'd highly recommend giving her a follow and, if possible, hitting her up when her commissions are open. Finally, I'd like to quickly explain some context behind the making of this video. An important aspect of this retrospective series is reviewing these games from a unique angle. For Sonic Colors, I described the game as Sonic's rough transition into 2D and gave a quick overview of the entire series up to 2022 through that lens. For today's video, I want to split this Forces deep dive into 2 halves, one covering the story of Sonic Forces and the other covering the gameplay. Due to the way Sonic Forces handles its exposition, some parts of the narrative leak into the game's 33 stages, and others are inaccessible without wiping your save file and starting from scratch. So I came up with an unorthodox method of recording the entire story of Sonic Forces independently from its gameplay. For the story segment of the video, I played through all of Sonic Forces on Steam up to the credits. Every time a new level opened up, I used a free cam mod to no-clip the player to the goal in the hopes of engaging in as little gameplay as humanly possible. Absolutely no other mods were used in the making of this video, as the last thing I'd want to do is ruin the sanctity of Sonic Forces. The game settings include a cryptic option to disable the radio, referring to the short dialogue exchanges that occur mid-level. The story segment will only cover exposition given on the world map screen and cutscenes, as Sonic Team has set the precedent that any dialogue triggered during gameplay is completely optional. But surely Sega wouldn't allow the player to disable in-game dialogue if the narrative relied on it to make sense, right? As for the gameplay segment of this video, well, I'll explain it in detail when we get to that point. With all of that out of the way, let's finally dive into Sonic Forces. Starting in chronological order with the events of Episode Shadow, we follow Rouge and Shadow discussing a suspiciously large Eggman base in Sunset Heights, a place described as having no strategic value. This information comes courtesy of the Intelligence Division, who are only mentioned here and never brought up again. Shadow deduces that Eggman wouldn't be positioned there without a good reason, and Rouge mentions rumors of a new weapon he's developing. Rouge lets Shadow know that Omega has gone on ahead of him and suggests that they should meet up on site, and Shadow retorts,
I'm more than enough on my own. I'll handle things my way.
Omega said the same thing. You two go together like chili and hot dogs.
Also, who says that? That's not a saying, that's an actual
We cut to Shadow's first encounter with Infinite, where he reveals that Omega has been defeated at the hands of his ultimate power. Not sure how and why Omega outclasses Neo Metal Sonic, but then again, Metal has been portrayed as a broke-ass in recent games, so I guess he's just washed. Infinite mentions that Shadow seems to have little interest in the Grand Union, to which Shadow claims that he's never met Infinite. Infinite formally introduces himself to Shadow, then goes on to explain his origin story, leading us into the first and only cutscene of episode Shadow. Following Shadow's infiltration of a hidden Eggman facility and annihilation of its forces, Eggman orders Infinite, known then as the Ultimate Mercenary, to correct the failure of his fallen troops. Unfortunately for him, Shadow makes quick work of Infinite, calling him out on being pathetic before making his exit. Bro really broke into a heavily armed facility just to tell some guy he has a skill issue. Out of shame and remorse, Infinite declares that he is not weak, hiding his face and inheriting the powers of a mysterious gemstone to distance himself from the failed mercenary that couldn't avenge his squad. Infinite laments the fact that Shadow doesn't remember him, despite being the one to drive him to his breaking point. He concludes that the old Infinite was too pathetic to remember, and that his newfound power has now rendered Shadow the more pathetic of the two. Infinite somehow distorts Shadow's senses, leaving him confused as to where he is and what is happening to him. When Shadow comes to, Infinite welcomes him back to his reality, noting that he didn't expect Shadow to return alive. Infinite goes on to gloat about his power, even going so far as to say that Sonic would stand no chance against him. Shadow tries to press Infinite on what exactly he means, but he makes a hasty retreat. Rouge reconnects with Shadow, unaware of the events that transpired with Infinite. With the Sunset Heights facility on the verge of collapse, Shadow also retreats. Wow, that was a really cool scene. I love the part where Shadow, and especially the part where he forces sin number 1. Sonic Forces is all about tell, don't show. With a budget unable to keep up with the scope of its story, the game relies heavily on floating heads and text boxes to convey the majority of its narrative. Episode Shadow is by far the most environmentally driven this story gets, as the rest of Sonic Forces treats its locations primarily as set pieces for characters to give exposition. As you can imagine, it's incredibly jarring and disorienting to simply be unable to see the events transpiring for the characters. I'm sure this isn't interesting for you to look at either. Sitting down and actually processing the events of episode Shadow for the first time, I realized that this expansion is hard carried by the character dialogue, containing perhaps all of Sonic Force's genuinely meaningful exchanges. I can see some elements of a good story at play here, but the narrative device Sonic Team chose for this game butchers all of them. It's like posting a JPEG so many times that it loses all of its pixels. When you have to condense something as complicated and politically charged as a war into small text boxes, and those paragraphs have to be further cut back to avoid losing the player's attention, you're left with a final draft that reads like the elevator pitch for a Disney Junior pilot. A shallow, underbaked idea that leaves a lesser impact on the reader's mind than Infinite did on Shadow's. Anyways, let's wrap up episode Shadow. We cut to just before the cutscene in the main campaign that kickstarts the events of Forces. Rouge explains to Shadow that Eggman has launched a massive assault, but she dismisses the threat as Sonic has just arrived on the scene. Shadow flashes back to what Infinite said to him just before he made his escape, a scene that happened all of 2 minutes ago for the player. Rouge then interjects to say that things have in fact gotten worse for Sonic, and urges Shadow for immediate assistance. We then cut to that aforementioned cutscene, tying the events of episode Shadow into the main campaign and concluding episode Shadow. Wait, that's it? That's episode Shadow? That was just a bunch of clips of Shadow yapping! But, whatever, we're done, it's over, let's just move on to the main campaign. Sonic Forces opens on a panning shot of an Eggman laboratory. Eggman monologues to himself about how his spite for Sonic has fueled him to create this invincible weapon. As Eggman describes his plans to expand his empire across the globe, the camera focuses on this weapon, which is in fact infinite. Or he could be referring to the aforementioned gemstone implanted in his chest. But semantics aside, I reckon that since Infinite is still undergoing his transformation here, this cutscene has to take place sometime before the events of Episode Shadow, but after that flashback cutscene.
The boss means business this time.
Look, I know that Orbot doesn't literally mean that Eggman has never meant business before this point. I just wonder why he was even given this line. He and Cubot have like 3 lines total in this game. They could be completely written out of the story and nothing would change. Why waste resources on voicing and animating either of them? But I digress. Let's just continue with the story. Next is that cutscene that Episode Shadow ended on. A group of egg robos approaches Teos, who is protecting several citizens of Sunset Heights. In the nick of time, Sonic makes his entrance, quickly turning the opposition into scrap metal. However, Eggman is uncharacteristically confident in his success. Sure enough, as Sonic attempts to attack him, he's swiftly knocked out of the way by...
Huh? Shadow! Zavok! Metal! Chaos!
I want to take a brief moment to just assess this lineup of antagonists. First, Metal, Sonic, and Chaos. Neither can speak, but from what we know about these characters, Metal is the only inclusion in this team that makes any sense. Sonic Adventure ended with Super Sonic calming Chaos down, returning him to his peaceful demeanor that he held as the protector of Chao millennia ago. Sonic knows this, yet doesn't question why Chaos would side with Eggman and antagonize him. Is he stupid? Then you have the 2 newer characters, Shadow and Zavok. Shadow is often shrouded in mystery and uncertainty, so I could maybe give Sonic a pass for not thinking twice about Shadow attacking him, but Zavok? Sonic Lost World clearly established that the Zeti can only be controlled by a magic conch. The Zeti also hate Eggman and only obey his commands to avoid the excruciating pain of the conch, all the while biding their time for an opening to overthrow him. There is no feasible way that Eggman could convince Zavok to join his cause without that conch. That being said, all these inconsistencies, coupled with the fact that none of these characters speak to Sonic, heavily implies that they're not the characters we know, alluding to the abilities of Eggman's new weapon. Yet the game, and by extension Sonic, will continue to treat this as some grand mystery. The game wants to have its cake and eat it too. It wants these replicas to be a shocking reveal, but it also doesn't think the player is smart enough to figure out the twist on their own. So it gives us these heavy-handed hints that basically spoil the reveal just to avoid blindsiding anyone. This is gonna pop back up in a little bit, so just keep it in mind as I continue through the story. A mysterious figure then descends onto the battlefield, to which Sonic's response is to scoff at it. There's no way Sonic was more concerned at the sight of Zavok than this fucker. Who wrote this shit? Infinite is able to dodge Sonic with ease, creating an opening for this rogues gallery of C-tier villains to absolutely body Sonic. With Tails unable to complete his analysis of Infinite in time, Sonic quickly falls victim to Eggman's army, and Eggman takes over the world. Off screen, while a Windows Movie Maker looking ass text ball describes the rise of the Eggman Empire and the formation of a resistance. We cut to a meeting with said resistance, which conveniently consists of almost the entire cast of Sonic Generations. This has gotta be one of the laziest examples of asset reuse I've ever seen in the game, and that's the only possible explanation. Why else would Silver the goddamn Hedgehog be here instead of, you know, in the future? Forces sin number 2. Sonic Forces is deathly afraid of making any kind of commitment. When Sonic Generations had all of Sonic's friends come together, they at least showed up to assist Sonic during missions, and had fun interactions with Sonic that brought a bit of joy into an otherwise narratively uninteresting game. But Sonic Forces doesn't introduce characters into its plot to serve a gameplay or narrative purpose. Non-player characters in Sonic Forces exist solely to make the game feel more grand and epic than it actually is. Wow, look at all these characters from Sonic's colorful past coming together to save the world. But oops, what about the people who will complain that Sonic has too many friends? We'll just relegate them to exposition so they don't overshadow Sonic, MIOC Sam, do not steal. How about when Sonic Team modeled and animated Chaos Zero for the pre-rendered cutscenes of Forces, only to leave not a single trace of him in the game's files? Now that's commitment, alright. Commitment to being a hater. I don't think there's a single idea present in Sonic Forces that lives up to its potential. because Sega and Sonic Team were so preoccupied with trying to appeal to as many corners of the fandom as possible that they didn't devote any time or effort into fleshing out said ideas. On purpose in some cases, and as a result, the final product was a game that practically no one in the fandom has anything positive to say about.
Despair is a luxury we don't have.
Whew, thanks BBG, I almost lost my cool there. The Resistance all comment on Sonic's disappearance and how it's affected each other and the general public. Silver, being a realist, concludes that the Resistance has to win the war without Sonic and Tails, since Sonic is presumably dead and Tails has lost it, apparently. Me when I'm Tails and I lose sight of my non-binary friend. After
6 months.
about half a year, SBO agrees that it's time they make their own miracle. Silver adds that the Resistance needs to restore faith in a terrified populace, to which Charmy says not everyone is terrified. A new recruit, our custom character, is joining the Resistance. We're given a blurb about how they're a survivor from the city before Amy accesses their file, prompting us to create our OC. Let me just randomly select some avatar parts and bam, Ava is ready to join the battle. By the way, I'm using the name Ava as a shorthand for the Avatar, because if I had to read the Avatar in my script 100 times, my face would go numb from soy jacking. Hey Forsoomfies, future Roxy here. I wrote that previous line as hyperbole because at this point I was only anticipating to write 15, maybe 20 pages of Force's critique. As I'm proofreading this script, it's at nearly 50 pages, and I literally do have to speak the name Ava over 100 times by the time I finish recording. This video is gonna be twice as long as the game itself, what the fuck?
Knuckles, what's the sit rep, Commander?
Wait, Knuckles is the commander for the Resistance? Then what was the point of focusing so heavily on Silver in the last scene? His realism, his comments about showing the people that strength doesn't just come in numbers? Was there an earlier draft where Silver was the Resistance's commander and they just didn't bother rewriting the cutscene directly before Ava's introduction? Holy shit, I made that person. I fucking love this game. Knuckles gives Ava the Wispon, a weapon which takes inspiration from the wisps of Sonic colors, and the Resistance prepares for the true battle to begin. We're then taken to the world map, where we're given a visual representation of the work the Resistance has cut out for them. With just 0.1% of the world free from Eggman's control, Ava is given their first mission. Damn, we're only at the second stage? Well, at least since we're this early in the game, we're still a ways away from any egregious plot holes or contradictions.
I just received some incredible news. Sonic is alive.
Oh, that's great. Sonic's closest friends casually discuss his being tortured in a Death Egg prison cell for half a year before sending Ava to steal a space shuttle from Chemical Plant. Force's sin number 3, stop wasting my damn time. Don't go out of your way to establish Silver's personality and connection to the Resistance if you're just going to sideline him in favor of Knuckles. Don't have the Resistance collectively mourn Sonic's disappearance and come to terms with winning the war without him, and then immediately follow it with the Resistance making Sonic's rescue their number one priority. I feel like this isn't even worth an entire sin, but then again, it's gotta be worth more than my time if this is what I'm dedicating it to. We cut to Tails attempting to repair Omega. Since we started with episode Shadow, we know that Omega was broken during an encounter with Infinite, but for players who followed Sega's recommendation of completing the main campaign before episode Shadow, the presence of a damaged Omega here would make no sense. During the repair, chaos rises from the sewers and starts to approach Tails, to which his immediate response is to beg a presumably dead Sonic the Hedgehog for help. Of course, this scene is by far one of the most controversial in Sonic Forces, but until I played Sonic Adventure for myself, I didn't quite understand why that was the case. Tails is, by all means, allowed to not function at 100% in wake of a hostile global takeover and the presumed death of his best friend, and I would stand by that logic if Tails was being attacked by, like, Infinite, but this is Chaos Zero, Chaos at his absolute weakest. In that case, I can't help but compare Tails in this scene to the Tails in Sonic Adventure who understood that he can't always pin the responsibility of saving the day on Sonic, and learns to stand up for himself. If it were any character but Chaos attacking Tails here, I'm sure this scene would have flown under the radar, but once again, Sonic Forces proves that its hubris is its desperation to appeal to fans of older, better Sonic titles. Forces sin number 4, using nostalgia as a plot device weakens storytelling potential. And speaking of nostalgia, here comes beloved Sonic Generations character Classic Sonic. Making quick work of chaos, Tails stares in awe and proclaims,
Oh, you're that Sonic from another dimension, aren't you?
"Oh, my mistake. This isn't classic Sonic. This isn't Sonic's past self as seen in Sonic Generations. This isn't the Sonic we see in Sonic Mania as alluded by that game's good ending. That Sonic experienced the events of Sonic Generations, whereas this Sonic is simply an interdimensional counterpart to the current day Sonic that Tails met at some point off screen. But if this isn't classic Sonic, then who is he? Gee, if only there were a name we could give to a Sonic lookalike who deceptively resembles a version of Sonic we're actually familiar with." Tails theorizes that joke's dead. Tails theorizes that Classic must have arrived in the canon dimension because of Eggman's power affecting alternate dimensions, then tells Classic how happy he is to see him.
Either way, it's still good to see you, Sonic. Heck, it's good to see any Sonic.
Search Sonic the Hedgehog with safe search turned off and I promise you'll change your tune. We rather abruptly cut to a flashback of Ava's first encounter with Infinite, presumably just before they joined the Resistance, as Infinite alludes to Sonic's defeat. With Ava's comrades defeated in one fell swoop, the pressure falls on them to take just one clear shot of Infinite. But Infinite is able to leverage his power to get Ava running for their life, showcasing his cockiness and arrogance in the process. Apart from this contradicting Knuckles' prior compliment of Ava, this is a really well written cutscene. It gives us a good idea of how the people of the world are coping without Sonic to save them, and it gives us insight into the personalities of Infinite and Ava. And because Ava is mute, this is one of the few scenes where the writers are forced to implement show don't tell. As you'll come to see, this is not the case when Ava and Sonic team up. Back in the present, Knuckles' spy Rouge delivers some bad news. Though Sonic is healing from his torture, he'll soon be banished into space. Not exactly a death sentence in the Sonic universe, but he can't run through space, so I guess it's a nasty punishment? Rouge describes Eggman's desire to show Sonic his completed empire before disposing of him, to which Knuckles responds that Eggman has reached a new low. However, with Eggman catching wind of the Resistance's escape plan, he's pushing Sonic's banishment date up. The clock is ticking.
But we don't even know where he's being held captive.
Yes the fuck you do, Amy. Knuckles told you he's in the orbiting prison in space. While that's not explicit confirmation that he's on a reconstructed Death Egg, you could very easily figure that out through process of elimination. There's only so many artificial satellites big enough to act as a prison.
None of this is good, Vector. That's why it's called war.
Bravo, Vince, you've done it again. As the Resistance begins their breakout plan, we finally see Sonic for the first time since he was captured. All that build-up and Sonic just looks bored. Bro makes the Death Egg look like a waiting room and Dr. Eggman look like a general practitioner. For the first and only time, we hear one of the replicas speak.
This is the end, Sonic.
Remember all that time we spent assessing Eggman's army at the beginning of the campaign? How the game treats the gathering of the Rogues Gallery as a mystery despite the heavy-handed hints that they're fake replicas of the characters we know? Well, rather than keeping the characters mute to hint at their soulless nature as cheap copies, the game instead opts to give fake Zavok a speaking role. Is it to keep the illusion of these characters being the real deal? No, because Zavok literally fades away in the following cutscene. Will other replicas follow suit, acting like their real counterparts to throw the cast off? No, because again, Metal Sonic and Chaos are already mute, and Shadow's fake is defeated before it ever speaks. My crackpot theory is that the only reason that Zavok speaks in this single cutscene is because of the colossal failure of the Nintendo Wii U. Sonic Lost World launched exclusively on Wii U as part of an exclusivity deal Sega had with Nintendo at the time, and obviously no one played Lost World as a result. But because Sega was banking on Zeddy becoming a popular mainstay like the Koopalings to Mario, and Zavok being their own personal Bowser that they can throw into spin-offs to drum up hype, they had to reintroduce Zavok in Forces so fans would understand why he's in games like Team Sonic Racing. And of course, you can't reintroduce fans to a character without giving them a speaking role. Hence, we have Sonic and fake Zavok in a scene that jarringly adapts the painfully unfunny stand-up comedy style writing of Colors in Lost World, with blatant reused music from Lost World to boot. Anyways, as Zavok prepares to banish Sonic, I guess, the lights flicker and Sonic's cyber restraints are disabled. This leads to Sonic and Zavok being forced to fight. This is when I realized I'm stupid and I can't just skip the battle by clipping out of bounds, so I had to actually put effort into Sonic forces whenever a boss level came up. I'm still omitting my thoughts on bosses until the gameplay segment though. After defeating Zavok, Sonic comments on a mysterious noise that echoes through the arena as he disappears, before realizing he needs to make his escape before the Death Egg collapses. Moving on. The next scene starts with Ava surrounded by egg robos. Luckily, Sonic notices the commotion and disposes of the bots. This is a neat callback to the very first cutscene with Sonic where he does the same for Tails, someone he's close friends with. Already we're seeing the friendship aspect of Sonic and Ava's relationship drummed up for fan service, but it's not too on the nose here. Unfortunately, this won't be the case for long, as subtlety is not this game's strong suit.
Hey, Rookie, you still in one piece? Oh, sure. Don't even bother to ask how I am.
I love when a story comments on its own poor writing in an unintentional yet totally meta way.
Your concern is touching, Knuckles.
Sonic and Ava make their way to the stolen chemical plant shuttle, making their escape from the Death Egg. Back on Earth, I guess, Knuckles welcomes Sonic back, then immediately cuts to the chase by notifying him of a weapons factory in Green Hill. Knowing that Sonic has just returned from months of imprisonment and torture, Knuckles asks the difficult question of whether he can handle being thrown back into the heat of battle. Then he just starts explaining the mission without waiting for an answer. The Resistance reluctantly decide to send Ava on the mission as well. Sonic finally chimes in, noting that he has
6 months.
a half year of payback to spend. We abruptly cut to Amy notifying Sonic of an attack in Mystic Jungle. Silver is able to confirm that the attacker is none other than Infinite.
I'm looking forward to a second round with this guy.
Forces Sin number 5. The stakes in Sonic Forces are non-existent. I'm trying to space these out so I'm not constantly interrupting the story, but I have to make this point eventually. Why should I care about Infinite as an antagonist if the months-long consequence for losing to him had no effect on Sonic's psyche? Why should I care about the Resistance finding the strength to go on without Sonic when the game immediately shifts to getting him back on the roster ASAP? Why should I care about the army of villain clones if Classic can solo one without breaking a sweat? The list goes on and on and on. The player is never given the opportunity to sit on the threats and consequences to the heroes for more than a minute, because the game is constantly going at a breakneck speed to get the player to the next level before they lose interest. Hell, sometimes the narrative will drag on forever and still either be pushed aside or contradicted moments later, as long as it results in the characters getting to the next set piece slightly faster. In Mystic Jungle, we see Infinite and Silver about to duel. Infinite shows excitement in the opportunity to crush a hero and destroy hope in the Resistance. During his fight with Silver, Infinite drops a gemstone resembling the one in his chest. Obvious foreshadowing aside, Sonic jumps in to take on Infinite when he sees Silver getting bodied, at which point this threat finally reveals himself in full to the Resistance.
You may call me Infinite in the brief moments that remain to you.
Oh, great! See, Infinite? Now we're getting to know each other. So, what's your favorite color? Do you like long, romantic walks on the beach? What's the source of your power? You can skip the first 2 questions if you like.
Besides the Zavok encounter, this scene reeks the most of that Colors in Lost World writing style. Nearly every line from Sonic is a cheeky attempt at a one-liner that fails pathetically to get even a chuckle out of me. But with the context that this is a war-torn, tortured version of Sonic the Hedgehog, yeah, this shit's hilarious. Treating this game as one big joke makes the whole experience worth it in my opinion. We see Infinite begin to put his full power on display before knocking Sonic away. After their duel, Infinite admits that Sonic has grown, yet insists that he still can't be defeated. Infinite knocks Sonic away again, once again omitting to take the blatant opportunity to defeat or at least capture his opponent, in favor of gloating about how weak they are compared to him. Wikipedia describes an idiot plot as a plot which is kept in motion solely by virtue of the fact that everyone involved is an idiot, and where the story would quickly end or possibly not even happen if this were not the case. Isn't that an interesting tidbit? Switching back to Tails' point of view, he vents to Classic about how he failed his Sonic. I'm actually going to play the scene out in full for you since it's so short.
I failed Sonic. Well, I mean this world Sonic, and Eggman's monster got him. But you're here now. It's like the world needs a Sonic. Any Sonic to keep things in balance. If we defeat Eggman, this war will be over. And if we can figure out the secret to his power, maybe we can get you home. Hey, the sensor is picking up Eggman. Let's hurry.
Tails makes two hypotheses here. First, he theorizes that because his world Sonic is dead, the world itself delivered Classic to take his place. This contradicts Tails' earlier theory of Eggman's power affecting other dimensions. And though this may be more of a playful remark than a legitimate hypothesis, there's still the fact that it seems incredibly disingenuous to insinuate to Classic's face that his world needs Sonic less than the canon world. Second, he assumes that Eggman's power is key to returning Classic to his world. This is in line with the prior theory, but as you'll come to realize, there isn't really a satisfying payoff to this. It just happens to be true in the end because, well, the story needed to end with Classic returning to his world. Having tracked Eggman's signal, Tails and Classic spy on him and Infinite having a discussion about their power source. For the first time, Eggman's new weapon is name-dropped as Infinite disposes of its supposed final prototype. There's yet another reason to assume that Classic Sonic is not the same as Classic. In Sonic Mania, the Phantom Ruby is a naturally occurring gemstone that Eggman has to excavate in Angel Island, not an Eggman invention. So the portal that Classic Sonic enters at the end of Sonic Mania can't be the portal that Classic emerges from in Sonic Forces, because both games' Phantom Rubies are identical in name only. Eggman describes the Phantom Ruby prototypes as defective models that can only record the DNA of the individual who activates it. Infinite comments that only he has the willpower to activate it. I don't think DNA is ever mentioned again in the script, but I have to assume that this is the writer's way of explaining how the Phantom Ruby can create replicas. Never mind how Eggman would even obtain the DNA of Chaos and Zavok, or the fact that the Phantom Ruby is able to replicate more than just organic matter.
It doesn't matter now with the lab locked down in Mystic Jungle. Which reminds me, didn't you run into Sonic there after he escaped?
Yes, but he was powerless against me. There is no need for concern.
You let the hedgehog live? That is a great source of concern!
I love when a story comments on its own poor writing in an unintentional yet totally meta way. Infinite dunks on Eggman for being unable to defeat Sonic for decades. Obviously, someone on the writing team confused the entire span of the Sonic franchise as being the canonical time frame that all of the games occur within, which would just be a funny slip-up if not for the fact that Sega was still using canon ages for the characters when this game released, making Eggman's rivalry with Sonic older than Sonic himself. Infinite hears Tails commenting on his and Eggman's conversation, but Tails hides before he can be spotted. Infinite suggests moving forward with a plan, to which Eggman agrees. He envisions the world being burnt to ashes, from which the Eggman Empire will rise. This is a notable departure from his characterization in Sonic Lost World, where Eggman insisted that he couldn't allow the world to be destroyed, as there'd be nothing left for him to rule over. Infinite describes his power fantasy to Eggman before making his departure. It's then that Classic jumps out from his hiding spot and prepares to attack Eggman. Evidently, Eggman is also familiar with this otherworldly version of Sonic. Eggman attempts to attack while Classic makes his pursuit. After defeating Eggman in battle, Classic and Tails celebrate. However, Eggman doesn't show any concern at losing the battle, as he believes he will win the war. In 3 days' time, the Resistance will be no more. Tails tries to press him for clues, but Eggman deflects.
If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise! You know what they say, the anticipation of the end is worse than the end itself.
Meanwhile, the Resistance reports that Eggman's army has made its way into Sunset Heights, and there are civilians who need to be saved. Unfortunately, Silver and Sonic are healing from the injuries sustained while fighting Infinite. Died 2017, born 2017, welcome back scrapped Io Delfino level. Knuckles, out of options, reluctantly sends Ava on a solo mission to save the civilians in the city.
That was impressive, but we still have a lot to do.
Great job! I knew you could do it if you believed in yourself.
Nice moves. But if you hog all the glory, how am I gonna look good?
Did the writers just leave notes for the tone each character should go for in this scene, realize they were running out of time, and decide not to finish writing it? This exchange is so disjointed. I don't believe a competent writer would come up with this and leave it at that. In Mystic Jungle, Tails proclaims his excitement that his world's Sonic is alive and healthy. Interestingly, he doesn't correct his prior hypothesis that Classic must have been brought into this world to take the place of its Sonic. But more importantly, Tails says that he needs to find Sonic specifically to tell him about Eggman's plans, whatever they may be. We'll return to the two of them later. In the meantime, Rouge explains that her system is picking up some strange readings from the site of Sonic and Infinite's battle. Silver concludes that it must be another Eggman robot, alluding to the only character we've seen the Resistance interact with in Mystic Jungle, Infinite. Remember that since we're skipping in-level dialogues, we didn't see Sonic refer to Infinite as a mech. This is an obvious contradiction to what episode Shadow established, that Infinite is an organic jackal who willingly gave up his old appearance and took on the powers of the Phantom Ruby. I thought it was interesting that this comment made by Silver is the only point in the script so far, not accounting for the in-level radio transmissions, that contradicts Infinite's backstory. Since episode Shadow was written after the script for Sonic Forces was finalized, it's possible that the writers for episode Shadow checked the cutscene script to see if they could feasibly get away with retconning Infinite's robotic nature, not accounting for any gameplay dialogue that would contradict said retcon. Anyways, Rouge confirms that there are 2 life readings, and Ava is sent to deduce who exactly is at Eggman's lab. When they arrive to the scene of Sonic and Infinite's battle, they find the gemstone that Infinite dropped before. With the context that Infinite was ordered by Eggman to destroy all the Phantom Ruby prototypes, I can't help but wonder why Infinite would have one on his person instead of, destroying it as soon as he found it. There, Ava is confronted by the 2 life readings, none other than Tails and Classic, who are looking for this world's Sonic but have instead found Ava. This scene is immediately followed up by Tails meeting up with the Resistance. Emphasis on immediately because there's no level transition, no world map transition, not even so much as a loading screen. In fact, using that aforementioned FreeCam mod, you can see the exact moment the in-game engine ends and the pre-rendered cutscene begins. There is absolutely no build-up to Tails reuniting with Sonic, despite that being the literal entire point of the last level, and despite the fact that the Resistance base is all the way in Sunset Heights. Also, Tails is never properly introduced to Ava because they obviously can't appear in pre-rendered cutscenes.
It's been generations since I seen you. You okay?
Sonic alludes to the events of Sonic Generations when addressing Classic, suggesting that he isn't aware that Classic isn't his past self, but rather an alternate dimension Sonic that merely resembles his younger self. Apparently, Tails and Eggman have met this otherworldly Sonic off-screen, but not Sonic himself? Tails tells the Resistance that Eggman has a plan that will destroy them all in 3 days, and Sonic responds with,
3 days, huh? Well, a lot can happen in that time.
Forces sin number 6. Sonic Forces is not as clever as it thinks it is. This is another rant about Tails, who has become my least favorite character in Forces by far. He's constantly making incorrect assumptions and making plans he doesn't follow through with, and he never makes any effort to correct himself when he's proven wrong, something that he later criticizes Eggman for.
A costly oversight, Doctor. This is why I always check and double check, as any good scientist would.
Tails, that's cap. Tails has made no strides to deducing why Classic is in his world, or how he could be returned to his original dimension, beyond making basic hypotheses which he doesn't follow up on with more thorough research and tests. He also gives the Resistance meaningless information. You said you were going to tell the Resistance exactly what Eggman's plans are, but all you've told them so far is that they're on a tight schedule to do what exactly? Check off their bucket lists? Telling everyone that they have mere days to live was important enough to finally rejoin the Resistance after losing it? It's like Sonic Team looked at his characterization in Sonic Colors and somehow completely failed to copy their own homework. In that game, Tails serves exposition to the player by translating what Yacker, a native of Planet Wisp, is trying to tell Sonic, and Tails, taking everything literally and at face value, spits out 2 translations for everything Yacker says, one being the correct answer given obvious context clues, and the other sounding like nonsense when spoken aloud. When you dumb down this already bare-bones characterization, you're left with a version of Tails who only makes baseless conjecture, completely ridiculing him and giving his genius 0 credit. Couple that with the fact that Tails is paired with a single mute character who can barely emote, and you're left with an utterly worthless subplot that adds nothing of value and actively wastes the player's time. Returning to the world map, we see Team Sonic's control finally rise thanks to their tireless war effort. They now control the Mystic Jungle area, about 14.29% of the world. Tails explains that there's little time before they're all wiped out, and Knuckles logically asks Tails what exactly Eggman's plan is. Vector rudely interrupts to tell the Resistance that Shadow is attacking their troops. Sonic laments Shadow for seemingly taking Eggman's side in the war, and Knuckles logically points out the inconsistencies in Shadow helping the world's enemy. Silver wonders if Shadow is under the control of Eggman's power, to which Sonic impatiently interjects to say that he'll go and find out himself. In the middle of Sunset Heights, Sonic confronts Shadow. Shadow prepares to attack, but another Shadow uses Chaos Control to knock him out of the way. You know, I could have sworn that Chaos Control required a Chaos Emerald to execute. I guess he had the foresight to download that Supersonic DLC. The offensive Shadow starts to disappear, prompting the real Shadow to explain to Sonic the concept of Phantom Ruby replicas. These virtual reality projections, as he calls them, are just as powerful as the real characters, but lack their heart and soul. Well, all of them but Zavok, I suppose. Hashtag Zavok sweep. Now, Sonic is finally on the same page as us, and with the help of Shadow, comes to realize that the war is all but lost if Infinite can keep creating replicas indefinitely. Thanks, Shadow, you were called for immediate backup half a year ago when Sonic was captured, but I guess 3 days before the literal end of the world is better than never. I'm just realizing we also haven't seen Rouge mention Shadow in the main campaign of Sonic Forces, so maybe she assumed his replica was the real deal and that Shadow betrayed her? I don't know, this game's funny. Knuckles interjects to relay some important information. Eggman's HQ is undermanned, leaving it open for attack, and thus begins the infamous Operation Big Wave scandal. Admitting that he gave practically no thought to the operation, Knuckles explains that the plan is simply to attack hard and fast until Eggman's army is destroyed. Knuckles mentions that Sonic is still fighting Shadow, meaning the Resistance is yet to be made aware of Infinite's ability to create a near-endless army of replicas. Tails interjects to say that he has no doubt this plan will succeed. Enough about how stupid Knuckles is for getting 80% of the Resistance killed in one fell swoop. I'm pinning the aftermath of Operation Big Wave on Tails. His ass knows better than to blindly pick brute force over strategy and careful planning. Oh, wait, the failure of Operation Big Wave is only mentioned within Stage 16, and completely glossed over in cutscenes. So what I really meant to say now is, Operation Big Wave happened, had no effect on the story, and then Ava fights Infinite. What do y'all want me to say about this cutscene? Seriously, I've written nearly 9,000 words at this point, and I'm only halfway through the main campaign of Forces. I think it's funny that Ava flashes back to shit that Sonic never said. It's like that one post about being so mentally ill that you imagine Naruto being proud of you for practicing basic hygiene. I think this cutscene is fine enough at showing Ava's growth since their first encounter with Infinite, but I think the smarter move for them would have been to just retreat. Clearly Infinite would have happily let them go again, so I can't help but feel like Ava is being reckless by not taking advantage of his arrogance.
I remember you.
Yeah, no shit, you already told us that. Infinite finally attempts to destroy his opponent, only to be foiled by the Phantom Ruby prototype. The prototype he was told to destroy, that is very clearly being held by Ava, but evidently Infinite fails to notice this and rambles about the imminent doom of the Resistance. Ava reunites with the Resistance, and Knuckles actually does acknowledge the failure of Operation Big Wave in this cutscene, but the impact of the loss is completely lost on anyone who's playing Sonic Forces with the radio transmissions disabled in the settings. Womp womp, I guess. Shadow asks Rouge if she's found a certain piece of intel, which Rouge says she... Damn, that's a tongue twister. Rouge says she. Shadow asks Rouge if she's found a certain piece of intel, which Rouge says she hasn't. I'm like 90% sure this is never brought up again, by the way. She has, however, found reports that Eggman's database is located in Chemical Plant. With no other leads, Tails and Classic make their way to Chemical Plant to see if they can figure out, well, anything, I guess.
According to Rouge, there should be a database somewhere. We have to locate the building it's in. There's a lot of ground to cover, so just finding it will be a chore.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Once Classic locates the database, Tails takes over and begins accessing its files. Tails sifts through mostly garbage data, including about 10 terabytes worth of selfies, or just under 4.4 million selfies according to my Galaxy S23. Luckily, not all of this information is useless. Tails finds a full description of the Phantom Ruby's abilities as a weapon. It essentially creates lifelike illusions by feeding false information to the brain. Going back to that DNA thing Eggman described with the prototypes, it's possible that the prototypes could only read the DNA of the brain belonging to the person who activated it, thereby making them useless as weapons, as the illusions would only affect the end user. Therefore, I was probably entirely wrong in my assumption that the Phantom Ruby replicas required real DNA from the actual characters. However, if everything I've just stated here is true, then it could create a pretty significant contradiction later in the story. Tails believes he's found the Phantom Ruby's weakness, but we won't find out what that is until he meets back up with the Resistance. Speaking of, the Resistance spots Metal Sonic flying above Sunset Heights and prepare a counterattack in the meantime.
Why would they bother making a fake out of something that already isn't real? Couldn't they just build more?
This game has rotted my brain so thoroughly, I can't decide if I should agree with Sonic for basically admitting that the Phantom Ruby is nothing more than a MacGuffin that does whatever the plot requires, or if I should be mad at him for refusing to see the value in a weapon that can essentially create unlimited robots with zero resources and manufacturing time. After defeating Metal Sonic, Sonic and Ava share a fist bump. I'd like to take a brief intermission to analyze this single scene frame by frame to deconstruct how the game handles the titular action of its theme song, Fist Bump. Pah, you thought. This isn't Quentin Reviews. Fuck you. As we return to the world map, Team Sonic's control of the world is increased to approximately 28.57%, now encompassing the Sunset Heights area. I'm only now realizing that this percentage isn't tied to any particular story beats, but rather it triggers when the player completes all of the story-centric stages within any given area, which seems completely redundant given the linearity of this game, but I digress. Tails and Sonic meet up to discuss the weakness of the Phantom Ruby. Apparently, the Phantom Ruby isn't self-sufficient and requires a massive amount of power to operate. Before the Phantom Ruby was name-dropped, it was almost exclusively referred to by either Eggman's power or Infinite's power, heavily implying that the Ruby is, in itself, a source of power. Though this doesn't contradict any known information, within the narrative of Sonic Forces at least, I think it counts as a pretty significant oversight. But whatever moves us closer to the credits, I guess. Anyways, Tails explains that the Phantom Ruby is receiving its power from the Death Egg. Given the nature of the Death Egg as a heavily fortified prison for the Eggman Empire, the Resistance has to get creative with their plan to cut off the power. Tails suggests the Resistance distracts Eggman while someone else uses the chemical plant database to shut down the Death Egg's weapons systems, therefore leaving it open for attack. This is actually a well thought out plan. It makes sense from a narrative standpoint, lends itself into an interesting gameplay scenario spanning across multiple levels and playable characters, and it demonstrates how Tails should be acting as the team's brains. Knuckles volunteers as a distraction, to which Amy says that Knuckles is too easily distracted. Silver suggests sending Ava, someone that Eggman definitely wouldn't expect. Expect to do what? You still haven't explained what the distraction is. Regardless, Ava is sent to Green Hill to get the attention of Eggman.
Unidentified heat source detected. Requesting analysis.
No, we already did this gag. Obviously the video isn't ending here, so what happened? So my recording crashed just 15 minutes shy of the credits, of course excluding gameplay segments. I've been using unofficial Steam Deck Homebrew, Decky Loader, and Decky Recorder to be precise, to capture footage of Sonic Forces with the FreeCam mod enabled, so I can't blame the hardworking community who made this video possible. Still, I can't help but feel frustrated that I stumbled so close to the finish line, not unlike Sonic Forces itself, I suppose. Though I had hoped to record 100% of this video's A-roll footage, I simply didn't have it in me to play through Forces again, so reluctantly I began searching for no commentary footage to trim down, and as I put it on the timeline, I noticed something puzzling. There was a large stretch of gameplay that wasn't broken up by cutscenes or dialogue. Specifically, with all gameplay segments removed, there was a significantly large jump cut between the defeat of Infinite and the penultimate cutscene leading up to the final boss. Eggman refers to a fortress reactor that simply does not exist in the script, unless you have the radio setting turned on for levels 28 and 29. I simply couldn't believe that the writers would allow a multiple level stretch to not contain any cutscenes or world map exposition, knowing full well that the story needed to accommodate for this radio setting. Well, I could believe it, but I had to play through Sonic Forces one last time to know for myself whether this was true. Well, that was one hell of a setback. I actually ended up having to play through Sonic Forces 3 more times just to get about 15 minutes of usable footage for this segment, and that's on top of the several playthroughs it took to get the rest of the footage for this video. So, quick intermission. There are a lot of strange quirks with video frame rates that I'm just learning about as I'm making this video. So, a video can have a constant frame rate where the entirety of the video is locked at a specific amount of frames per second, or it can have a variable frame rate, where the video has a constantly changing frame rate that's kept at a certain limit. The aforementioned Decky Recorder plugin records in a variable frame rate, which I'm guessing is so that the frame rate of the recording always matches what the Steam Deck is outputting. No use in recording 30 FPS gameplay at double that frame rate, right? But Adobe Premiere Pro doesn't support variable frame rates. It has features that claim to support them, but the audio always ends up becoming desynced from what's happening in the video, rendering the footage useless. So all of that gameplay footage had to be re-encoded through a transcoder. The only program that output usable footage at a constant frame rate of 60 FPS was Handbrake. So I put all of the raw footage through Handbrake, and several hours later everything worked fine in Premiere, right? No, because now the long 1+ hour story playthrough of Forces has been trimmed down to under 40 minutes somehow. Checking the error log shows that the program is aware that the amount of frames at output is less than what it was expecting, but nothing to explain why that was the case. So I play through the game up to stage 20 and start another recording from there, this time reaching about 40 minutes. Once again, the output is trimmed, this time to about 35 minutes. So I play through the game again to record the final 5 or so minutes of dialogue. And I'm not bringing up my frustrations to bash on these programs, except Adobe. Adobe slander is always okay. If I had spent 2 fucking minutes reading the GitHub page for Decky Recorder, I would have seen that the program was regularly failing to save footage that's over a half hour long. And while my footage was seemingly saving in its entirety, this bug does fall in line with the issues I was experiencing when trying to re-encode those 40+ minute recordings. So if you're planning on using Decky Recorder for content creation like I did, make sure to 1. Record your gameplay in no more than 30-minute intervals, and 2. Re-encode your footage using Handbrake, making sure the frame rate is set at a constant 60 FPS, or 30 depending on the game. Oh, and if you're wondering why I had to do 3 playthroughs instead of 2, it's because I accidentally skipped a single text box before a character was finished speaking, and there's no backlog feature in this game, so I had no choice but to start again from the beginning. Back to Sonic Forces, the percentage of resistance control has increased to 42.86%, now encompassing the Green Hill area. Sonic reports to Knuckles that he's almost at Chemical Plant. He asks Knuckles how Ava's destruction is going. He gives a fake positive comment and suggests that they may have to stop calling Ava the Rookie. Kind of another tangent, sorry about this, but the way this game handles names is so annoying. So for gameplay purposes, you have Modern Sonic, Classic Sonic, and the Avatar. These do a fine enough job at explaining what each one is. Modern and Classic obviously referring to their Generations counterparts, where you have boost gameplay, and then two-dimensional, more Genesis-like gameplay. And then you have the Avatar, which is simply just referring to the fact that they're a character which you can customize. But then in the context of the lore, they're treating these as separate characters, different members of the army, so you can't have Sonic, and Avatar, you gotta give them names. So then you have Sonic, and the avatar is the rookie because they can't give the avatar a canon name because otherwise that defeats the purpose of a character creator. And then you have Classic Sonic, but obviously you can't call him Classic because not only is that something you wouldn't call a person in real life, it also doesn't make sense under the context that he's in another dimension or he's from another dimension. So then in this case you have to call him something else. But they never came up with a name for him, so he's either the Sonic from another dimension or Sonic, oops, I mean the other Sonic. That completely off topic, my apologies. Tails explains the next step of his plan, which is to use the chemical plant computers to remotely disable the Death Egg's weapons.
Perfect! I've been waiting for my turn to bust some heads.
What the fuck, Sonic? You just need to log into a damn computer and chill out. The resistance percentage once again increases, this time to 57.14% as they reclaim chemical plant. Rouge reports that the plan worked. She and Tails urge Classic to destroy the Death Egg, and Vector butts in to explain that the Death Egg is dangerous. As if the entire plan leading up to this point wasn't to address specifically that. Oh, I forgot to mention that the background music changed during this scene. That's pretty cool, I guess. Giving off some Comet Observatory vibes. Now, if it weren't after I completed like 2/3 of the game already. Alright, testing. I completely forgot a cutscene. Like, through the entire, 2+ hour script I wrote, I just somehow completely forgot the cutscene where the Death Egg explodes. It's not anywhere in my script. It wasn't in the story edit. I put every single scene together like a storyboard to make it easier to edit on the timeline, but I just completely missed this Death Egg cutscene somehow. So we're just gonna watch through the cutscene real quick and I'll give you my live Roxy commentary. So as you can see, the Death Egg is exploding. This is after the long plan, which consisted of creating a distraction, then going to the chemical plant to disable the Death Egg weapons, and then finally destroying the Death Egg. And of course the Resistance is celebrating, but Eggman is not happy about this. He compares them to something on your shoe that you can't wipe off. And I think this is the only line that Orbot has throughout the entire game after the intro, the opening cutscene. And then you have Infinite come down, and Eggman's reminding him that there's only 5 more hours until the plan's executed. So that's interesting that he's talking about the plan being executed when the Phantom Ruby is supposedly its power source is being cut off. I find that interesting because I guess it's kind of foreshadowing, but it's not very long after this that it's retconned that the Death Egg was the power source of the Phantom Ruby. But anyways, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. So Eggman suggests to Infinite to make it a tactical retreat. And Infinite, of course, sees that as cowardly. He doesn't want to run away. He sees it as fleeing with their tails between their legs, and he's displeased. I find this to be in line with his previous characterization. Very clearly, he looks down on Ava and Sonic when he lets them run away, but again, I don't like that aspect about his character, that he just lets them run away because he prefers to look down on them and mock them rather than take easy opportunities to destroy his opposition. So, yeah, it's consistent, but it's an aspect of his character that I dislike. So I just wanted to mention that. Eggman is pissed off. He just says, "Shut up and follow me," and of course, they all follow, and that leads right into the next segment, which was scripted. So, yeah, that's that. The Resistance destroys the Death Egg in space. This equates to the Resistance owning more of the Earth somehow. Rouge reports that the mission was a success, with Shadow adding that the Phantom Ruby should be effectively useless now. The Resistance all agrees that they need to take advantage of the opening they've created, but Rouge and Sonic caution the others that they can't let their guard down as long as Eggman and Infinite are out there. Amy pleads for everyone to return home safely, and Knuckles tells the Resistance that Eggman is at the Central Tower in Metropolis. When Sonic confronts Eggman, he commands Infinite to open a wormhole of sorts. Eggman explains that he's just opened the entrance to an isolated dimension called Null Space, where literally nothing exists. Eggman gives Sonic a cold farewell as Infinite charges the wormhole, causing everything around them to be sucked in. Ava quickly rushes in to grab Sonic's hand as he's being pulled into Null Space. Sonic begs Ava to save themselves, but it's too late. The two are sucked into the void, once again leaving Tails without his best friend. Eggman explains to Tails, flabbergasted at the Phantom Ruby being unaffected by his plan, that he anticipated the destruction of the Death Egg and built a backup generator underneath the city. Oh my god, there are so many things I want to say about this single line, but I don't think I have the strength for another tangent at this point. To put it simply, why are you giving plot armor to your antagonists in the home stretch, the part of the story where the tides of war are supposed to shift in favor of the protagonists? Addendum to Force's Sin number 5. Revoking the reward part of high risk, high reward is equally as damaging to my interest in the story as a lack of stakes. The little praise I had for the Death Egg arc is as good as worthless now, because there may as well have been no stakes. To no one's surprise, Sonic and Ava have somehow escaped the inescapable. Sonic explains to a dumbfounded Eggman that it was all thanks to the power of friendship. The whole scene is basically just making fun of Eggman for being friendless, and it comes off as incredibly preachy. I can physically feel the tonal whiplash. Returning to the world map, the Resistance now has control over Metropolis, meaning every area we've seen in the game so far has been liberated from Eggman's Iron Fist. The war isn't won just yet, however, as Eggman's Resistance-ending plan is less than an hour from fruition. Shadow says the Resistance has run out of time, and they have to break into the Eggman Empire Fortress immediately. As far as I'm aware, the game hasn't made any reference to this fortress up until this point, but why not pad for runtime at this point? Silver says that this is their last chance to bring peace to the world, and Tails interrupts to say that he'll be sad when Classic leaves. Amy tells Tails that Classic will probably be returned to his dimension once the Phantom Ruby is destroyed. She's just repeating Tails' current running theory verbatim here. What was the point of having Amy say this? Tails thanks Classic for his contribution to the Resistance, and Espio reminds him that they still have a war to win. At the Eggman Empire Fortress, the entire Resistance goes up against an army of Phantom Ruby replicas. After clearing through some of the opposition, Sonic confronts Infinite.
Hey, Infinite! Long time no see. Did you miss me?
Why, yes, I did. I've been looking forward to finishing your annoying friends.
My GN, hire this man. Infinite warns the Resistance to prepare for oblivion, then someone fires a couple shots at him, none other than Omega seeking payback for his defeat, which you wouldn't have the context of if you didn't play episode Shadow beforehand. Rouge is relieved at the sight of Omega, but celebrations are quickly cut short as Infinite finally enacts the Eggman Empire's long-anticipated plan, literally dropping the sun on the Resistance. Knuckles, in shock, denies that such a thing could be real, but unfortunately for them, Tails confirms that the sun is a real threat so long as they are under the influence of the Phantom Ruby. Eggman appears in front of the Resistance to gloat about his plan that somehow took 3 days to execute. Meanwhile, on some random cliff, Ava stares at the descending sun in disbelief, Phantom Ruby prototype in hand. Tails rendezvous with him, noticing the prototype glowing, and remembers what Eggman said about the prototypes only reacting to the person who activated it. Tails suspects that Ava's heroism triggered the prototype and suggests using it to cancel out the illusion formed by the finalized Phantom Ruby. Remember a bit earlier when Tails was checking the chemical plant database and I theorized that the DNA requirement meant the illusions created by prototypes only affected the person who activated it? Well, if that were the case, then Ava would only be able to save themselves from the sun using the prototype. So I really have to wonder why, after all that, they would specify that the Phantom Ruby prototypes can only record DNA from the person who activated it, as if it would ever be brought up again. Reading what Eggman said as literally as possible, I suppose the Phantom Ruby prototype simply can't be used by more than one person, since they're locked behind some kind of biometrics. This would have been a non-issue for the entire game up to this point, as the Phantom Ruby is implanted in Infinite's chest and he's the only person to physically use it. But as we'll see later, Eggman does use a ruby himself, so I'll give the writers the benefit of the doubt by assuming that their intention was always that Eggman needed a Phantom Ruby that both he and Infinite could use, and the dialogue just did a poor job of getting that point across. God knows the Force's narrative could use some benefit of the doubt. With the sun just mere moments away from crashing into the Earth, Infinite and Eggman gloat at the seemingly doomed Resistance, but as the clock hits 0, the sun suddenly disappears. The Resistance celebrates, and a peeved Eggman follows a ray of glowing red light into the sky. Ava loses balance and trips at the top of the fortress, shattering the prototype. Eggman notices the prototype, so surely he could order Infinite to respawn the sun now that Ava has no defense against it. Nope, apparently not. With the tables turned on the Eggman Empire, Resistance morale reaches an all-time high as Knuckles leads the army into their final battle. Skipping over stage 26, Sonic confronts Infinite for their final battle together. They exchange some honestly weak trash talk and then they rush into battle. There's also a cutscene mid-battle where Ava joins Sonic in the fight, but this cutscene isn't in the game's theater mode, so I'm not counting it as part of the story.
Impossible. I cannot be defeated.
Wrong, loser! The things that can't be defeated are heart, soul, and the bonds of friendship.
Unironically, this is what 06 fans sound like when they're defending 06. Infinite, in desperation, shouts that he can still fight. He then teleports away, I guess, presumably to leave his fate open-ended in case he ever became a popular character in the fandom. An overly confident Eggman descends upon Sonic and Ava to inform them that his plan has not yet failed, but rather has gone into overtime. Skipping over stages 28 and 29, we finally find our heroes at the penultimate scene before the final boss. Sonic and Ava bring it in for a fist bump, believing Eggman has reached his wit's end. But the two are interrupted by the appearance of a giant deformed Death Egg robot, piloted by none other than Eggman. He explains that the Forge's reactor, whatever that is, was a decoy. The Resistance reports an exponential amount of enemy sightings, prompting Sonic to interrogate Eggman for an explanation. Eggman tells him that he's incorporated the Phantom Ruby into the Death Egg robot. This to me implies that Infinite is dead and Eggman has extracted the ruby from his corpse, because there's simply no way he'd survive having this ripped out of his chest.
I merely incorporated the Phantom Ruby into this Death Egg robot.
But that means the Phantom Ruby no longer has a vulnerable energy supply. It's an invulnerable ruby?
Oh wait, hold on. So the Phantom Ruby isn't running on the power source of the massive backup generator underneath Metropolis anymore? It's running just fine connected to the Death Egg robot, of which we've seen dozens in Sunset Heights? Sure, why not? Eggman says his robot has now surpassed Infinite, before revoking that statement to push himself as the ultimate form.
Your plan will end like all your plans do, with you sitting in a pile of busted robot parts wondering how you failed so badly.
The voice direction has been gradually decaying over time, but this takes the cake. It's truly gone to shit. How the fuck do you manage to make Roger Craig Smith sound like Jerry Seinfeld? Of course, everything works out for the heroes in the end. The army of Phantom Ruby replicas disappears and the Resistance celebrates. As the sky clears, Sonic and his friends bid adieu to Classic, and the rest of the Resistance makes a pact to clean up the real world they all live in. Gotta throw in one last hammy moral before the credits roll, I suppose. In a post-credits scene, Knuckles gathers the Resistance in their hideout one last time to disband the group. Silver interjects to say that there's still more work to do, once again acting a lot more like the commander than Knuckles ever did. Ava formally quits the Resistance, and Knuckles hesitantly lets them go. You know, right after disbanding the Resistance, so Vector comments that he never thought he'd see Ava see the war to its end, and Knuckles admits that they're not a rookie anymore.
You did good out there. It's not like you just waited till the last minute to come in and act all cool, saving the day.
I love when a story comments on its own poor writing in an unintentional yet totally meta way. Tails also sort of acknowledges that the Resistance is coming to an end, while also saying that the Resistance as a group has to work together and make a diligent effort to restore the world. I couldn't think of a better way to send off this unbelievably lame iteration of Miles Prower, to be honest. On the surface, Ava runs into Sonic. Both moving forward in their own direction, Sonic concludes that he and Ava aren't so different after all. Sonic runs into the distance and Ava swings into the sunset, thus finally concluding the narrative of Sonic Forces. Whew, what a massive undertaking this has been so far. I honestly wasn't expecting this video to be any longer than 30 to 40 minutes when I first started writing this script, but I still learned that I have a lot to say about this game, and there's still more to cover. We're only at the midpoint here. I swear the next entries in the Sonic Boost Retrospective won't be such a time investment. I want these to be more casual reviews, sitting at around half an hour each. Anyways, we've reached the end of the story segment of this video, so before we discuss the gameplay, I want to take a brief intermission to cover everything else about the game, the soundtrack, art direction, and what have you. Let's start with the music of Sonic Forces. Forces has a wide range of genres under its belt, one of those genres unfortunately being the Fox Genesis style that games like Sonic 4 are notorious for. Whereas Generations and Mania were permitted to evolve the musical identity of classic Sonic, Forces is stuck in the past with rather uninspired synthetic sounds attempting to replicate the sound chip of the Sega Genesis.
They've made a total mess of this place. We have to stop Eggman and end this war quick. No sign of him around here. He might be closer to the center.
Though, to be honest, Classic's music gets a lot more hate than it deserves. Most people remember Faded Hills and assume that's what all of the classic music of this game sounds like, but there are actually a lot of great compositions that I think are worth revisiting. There's also a good amount of variety in the digital instruments used, preventing the soundtrack from being frustratingly monotonous like it is in Sonic 4. Outside of classic Sonic, there's a ton of good music in this game that his music unfortunately overshadows, like the orchestral pieces used for menus and cutscenes, which are well composed but ultimately nothing to write home about. I would have liked if they took the Sonic Lost World approach and mixed in a few genres with the orchestral instruments just to spice things up a bit.
Unstoppable creation. This is my dream come true. With this invention, I can expand the Eggman Empire across the globe and conquer the world!
Modern Sonic has a good mix of digital synths and guitars, though the style does get a bit repetitive. Every single modern song uses basically the same instrumentation, and this also extends to the music in the Sonic and Avatar tag team levels.
Keep them in check, but not for long.
That'll work. I'll find Shadow and be back in no time. We'll blitz the place and open up a path for the resistance. Right, partner?
I don't dislike the modern style, but the tracks don't do a great job at differentiating themselves from one another. The Avatar's music, however, has a lot of variety. Every track has great instrumentation, a catchy composition, and unique voice to provide vocals. Yeah, that's right, these minute-long stages get full-fledged songs. It's similar to what Sonic Team did for the soundtrack of Cyberspace and Frontiers, but most of the stages in that game have short loops that only last a minute or two, whereas Sonic Forces dedicates more time to letting the player soak in the vocals than they do to the levels themselves. I'd highly recommend giving the Avatar tracks a listen outside of the context of the game. Next, the art of Sonic Forces. I honestly think that Sonic Forces is the best looking game in the series thus far. Sonic Unleashed has incredibly strong and timeless art direction, but Forces looks and feels amazing both in low resolution and high fidelity scenarios. Visually, Sonic Forces truly looks like a next-gen Sonic game, something that even Sonic Frontiers on PS5 and Xbox Series can't claim. Though I would argue that the art direction in Forces is overall slightly weaker than past games. The colors in Green Hill are dull, Sunset Heights is overly saturated, and the mishmash of dimly lit trees and blinding neon lights in Mystic Jungle can be a bit jarring. But when the art direction hits, it hits. The refined, futuristic look of Metropolis, the opposing presence of the Eggman Empire Fortress, they modeled the surface of the Death Egg for a QuickTime event, and it looks fantastic. These cinematic scenes are always a treat, showcasing the best set pieces of each location with convincing lighting effects and creative camera work. Figures that Sonic Forces is at its best when it's automating its gameplay. Oh, and I can't forget the great UI design this game has. Designing your war-themed game's menus and HUD elements after the Soviet art movement constructivism is genius, and yet another way this game sets itself apart from its predecessors artistically. And finally, I suppose I should also cover this game's DLC while I'm here. Besides Episode Shadow, there's 3 cosmetic packs for the Avatar and 1 DLC pack for Modern and Classic Sonic, the latter pack being, of course, the infamous Super Sonic DLC. Originally, this DLC was offered for free throughout January 2018, with the price set to increase to $199 starting on the 23rd. There had been a recent trend of Supersonic being an optional completion bonus in 3D Sonic games, rather than incorporating Supersonic into the narrative, but to charge players for the option to transform was unprecedented. Sega eventually walked the decision back and kept the DLC free to download forever. Still, it's massively disappointing that Supersonic is no longer a reward for clearing the game or tackling optional challenges, but rather something that's handed out on digital storefronts with no fanfare. The only other paid DLC for this game is a 99-cent Shadow costume for the avatar. As far as I'm aware, this followed the same pricing structure that the Supersonic DLC was planned to follow. The DLC was free during the game's launch month, and then locked behind a paywall for 99 cents. There are also two other cosmetic packs for the avatar that didn't cost anything, at least initially. The first is a Sega pack consisting of various Sega IPs represented in the form of costumes for the avatar. These were initially a pre-order bonus, but availability differs depending on your platform. For example, on Steam, most of the costumes are unavailable to download directly from the Steam client, but for some reason Joker from Persona 5 is available to download separately. The other cosmetic pack is Sonic t-shirts. This was around the time where Sonic's marketing team would constantly poke fun at the character in his games, desperately trying to convince the higher-ups that Sonic fans were laughing with him, not at him. So yeah, it's just pandering to meme culture, yippee. I think that covers every piece of content of note pertaining to the main campaign. There are a few mechanics I haven't touched on, such as online features and missions, but these amount to little more than cheap gimmicks that barely reward you for regularly playing the game. I've also decided that for my own sake, I won't be covering the bonus stages, extra stages, or the tie-in comics, including the 4-parter prologue and the current IDW series. The way Sonic Forces handles optional levels is almost identical to the way Sonic Colors handled its mini-acts, and the comics are written by Ian Flynn, not Pontac and Graff. Ultimately, I had to set expectations for myself on what I can reasonably cover, and for this video that encompasses everything that makes up the in-game canon of Sonic Forces and nothing else. Alright, that leaves us with the 33 main stages to cover. I decided to play the game on a 100% save file so we can see all the various collectibles that you can unlock as you progress through the game. Rather than playing through all the stages in order, we'll be dividing them up based on who you play as in the stages. We'll be covering the stages of Modern Sonic, Shadow, Classic Sonic, Ava, and the tag team stages in that order. And yes, I'm counting Shadow as his own character in the main game, since his stages have a unique arc that ties into the narrative of Sonic Forces. To streamline the process of covering the game stage by stage, I'm going to be using a 5-star ranking system to review each level. And keep in mind that this is just within the context of Sonic Forces, so if I give a level 5 stars, that doesn't mean that I think it's among the best Sonic stages ever created. 5 stars just means that it would be one of the best stages in the game. The first stage for every character will include a short description of their playstyle as a whole, then it and every subsequent stage will be ranked by the following metrics. Level design. 1 star means the stage may as well play itself, 3 stars means there's a good amount of challenge and or branching paths, and 5 means it's among the most interesting in the game. For bosses, the score will be based on how well I personally think the arena suits the battle taking place. Presentation. 1 star means the stage was flat and uninspired from a cinematic standpoint. 3 stars means there's at least one QuickTime event or a unique camera shot that I thought was worth mentioning. And 5 stars means the stage is very creative in how it presents itself. Collectibles. 1 star means red rings, number rings, and silver moon rings in a stage are either too hard to find or too close to one another to comfortably collect. 3 stars means they're not too hard to find but not particularly well hidden either. 5 stars means the collectibles strike a good balance between being difficult to find and difficult to collect. Narrative. I have a premonition that this is gonna be controversial, so hear me out. The worst thing that the narrative at any given level can be is important, because it renders the option to turn off the radio transmissions obsolete. If you have to have the radio on to understand what's happening in the story, I think that's an accessibility issue. Think of players who may have poor eye-hand coordination, who are now having the platform on top of listening to what the characters are saying or reading the text on screen. So if you're going to include an option to disable all those things, then the story better make sense on its own. 1 star means that playing the stage with the radio setting is mandatory, as it contains vital information that the writers failed to properly convey in cutscenes. 3 stars means the radio dialogue is inoffensive, but all in all adds nothing of value to the overall narrative. 5 stars means the dialogue builds on characters and plot points in a meaningful way, but isn't required to understand whatever's happening in the plot. Boss AI. Obviously this only applies to boss stages. 1 star means the AI is frustrating, 3 stars means the AI is perfectly manageable but the boss itself is lacking in challenge, and 5 stars means the AI is challenging yet perfectly fair. By adding the scores for each applicable metric together, I'll determine a final rating for each level, and I'll be rounding any decimal scores to the nearest whole number, because I think half and quarter stars defeat the purpose of a 5-star scale. And with that whole explanation out of the way, let's finally take a look at the gameplay of Sonic Forces. Stage 1, Green Hill, Lost Valley. This stage takes place after the first cutscene establishing Eggman's new weapon. I can't unhear the Sonic Forces speed battle sound effects when this music plays. This song's permanently registered in my head as fuck-ass mobile game music. So, how do I best describe the boost-in forces? In Sonic Colors, the boost gauge is filled primarily by collecting White Wisp capsules. These capsules are sparse and only refill a fraction of the boost gauge, forcing the player to explore and engage with the level design, using Wisp powers to find shortcuts and collectibles, scouring levels for hidden paths that shave seconds off your run, etc. Forces bizarrely adapts the White Wisp capsules without any of the engaging gimmicks that it enabled. There are no power-ups and no moves for traversal outside of the boost, meaning the level design takes a critical hit to the point that the game consists of seemingly nothing but empty hallways. So you've taken the philosophies of an exploration-based playstyle and threw all of the exploration elements in the trash. What else did you fuck up?
We don't have time to lose.
Oh yeah, that. Ignoring the logistics of how and why the Wisps are on Sonic's home planet, collecting these capsules now entirely fills the boost gauge. You're just referencing the mechanics of past games for the sake of nostalgia at this point. In a roundabout way, Sonic Team recreated the boost gauge of Sonic Unleashed and Generations. In those games, the gauge is filled by collecting rings, of which there are obviously plentiful in every level, but with this excess of boost comes a higher concentration of obstacles and tricky jumps, testing the player's reflexes and muscle memory. Both the obstacle course approach and the exploration approach are valid ways to design a platformer. Maybe not a Sonic platformer specifically, but at least it's something. You know what Forces has? If you press the X button in gameplay, Sonic will start boosting. Yeah, that's right. Did you know that Sonic could boost in this game? All you gotta do is hold the X button, and I'm already done with the level. I honestly have no idea what Sonic Team was aiming for with this playstyle. Yeah, that would explain it. Yet another example of Sonic Forces attempting to merge elements from multiple past Sonic games together, without even the slightest bit of effort put into making them work together. Anyways, onto the level itself. I would give this stage's level design 1 star for its pitiful lack of branching paths, only 2, and one of them is only challenging to traverse in the sense that you have to actively fight against gameplay automation to get to it. But because this is a tutorial stage, I expect this level of minimalism to ease the player into the gameplay loop, so I'll be nice and give the level design 2 stars. I'll be honest, Green Hill is a horrible pick for the first area to represent this game. Everyone is sick of seeing Green Hill, and dredging the place in dull yellows and browns doesn't help the matter. This alone would warrant giving the first stage a low score for presentation, but there's just something about the camera angles that makes this stage feel so stiff? Lifeless? I honestly don't know how to describe it. What really ticks me off though is these fuck-ass Lost World worms. These things are supposed to be native to the Lost Hex. It's like they're not even trying to hide the asset reuse. 1 star for presentation. I'd say that for a tutorial level, the collectibles are pretty well hidden. The red rings encourage the player to engage with Sonic's base moveset, and the position of the silver moon rings is a bit tricky to get to, but all 5 are placed close together to teach the player how exactly they work. I didn't encounter the number rings on this playthrough, but I believe they're placed in order on the bottom path, which is fair enough for the first stage. 3 stars for collectibles. The stage's story kicks off with Tails informing Sonic that Eggman's forces have invaded Sunset Heights. Sonic notifies Tails that he's on his way, and the rest of Sonic's lines are cheesy one-liners that he says to no one in particular. I've never really thought about this until now, but why would Sonic have an earpiece before the Resistance even exists? I don't really buy it, if I'm being honest. 2 stars, since this is really the only build-up we get for Eggman's takeover. Total score for Stage 1 is 2 stars. Stage 5, Death Egg vs. Zavok. This stage takes place after the Resistance devises their breakout plan. This arena is so cramped that they had to disable the boost, and it only gets smaller as the fight progresses. 2 stars for level design. The appearance of the arena, however, is pretty slick. I like the small glimpse of Earth we see just above Zavok as the battle begins, only for the backdrop to transition to the jail cells. Shoutout to prisoners.png. The intro and finisher cutscenes are a nice touch too, 3 stars for presentation. The exchange between Sonic and Zavok is just insults. There's nothing here that'd affect your understanding of the plot if you missed it. 3 stars for narrative. Zavok's AI is a huge pushover, and the battle consists solely of walking out of his range and mashing A whenever you see the homing attack icon appear. And that aforementioned finisher cutscene triggers at like 25% health, so the fight is presented as much longer than it actually is. I wasn't particularly frustrated when fighting Zavok, however, I was just bored. 2 stars for boss AI. Total score for Stage 5 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 6, Death Egg, Egg Gate. This stage takes place right after defeating Zavok. This is one of my favorite stages in the game. I enjoy the branching paths at the beginning that each net you a different reward. It's a bit finicky trying to get the game to lock onto the enemy you're trying to homing attack, but it works fine enough. The level design embraces its linearity to craft fast-paced 2D segments and grind rail segments that feel grand when placed on the backdrop of space. This stage has a unique gimmick of platforms that quickly rise to become stairs, so you have to utilize this game's air boost mechanic to reach the edge of the stairs, so the top step carries you upward and you don't lose your time climbing the stairs. Oh yeah, did I cover air boosting before? That's a thing you can do in this game. Anyways, I'm gonna give the level design 5 stars, which sounds like overkill, but remember, I'm basing the score on how good the stage is compared to the rest of Forces, and I honestly think this is as good as it gets when it comes to this game. Imposing egg carriers guarding machineries built atop massive asteroids, a giant death egg staring at you from afar, and on top of it all, a quick-time event that sees Sonic hitching a ride on a spaceship, caught in the crossfire of a heated laser battle. This shit makes me giddy. 5 stars for presentation, argue with the wall. Maxing out the red rings in this stage mostly amounts to replaying the stage to take each alternate path at the beginning, but the number rings and silver moon rings more than make up for it. The number rings lead you to the right side of the stage at the beginning, and you have to keep a close eye out for one of the rings to make sure you collect them all in order. You can't miss the silver rings, but rather than making them difficult to collect, the stage instead uses them to create a mini speedrunning challenge. I want to give 4 stars for collectibles, but red rings take the priority, and the red ring positions in this level aren't particularly clever. 3 stars. The one objective downside to this level is that there's really nothing going on narratively. Sonic is just commenting on his surroundings since he has no way to contact his friends back home. I think it's funny that Sonic says he was held on the Death Egg, as he heads towards the Death Egg and away from the direction he was leaving his prison cell from. I got nothing else. 3 stars for narrative. Total score for Stage 6 is 4 stars. Stage 8, Mystic Jungle, Luminous Forest. This stage takes place after Sonic and Ava infiltrate the weapons factory in Green Hill. This level has 2 branching paths, one in the 2D section and one in the 3D section. Boosting through the top path in the 2D section is much faster than navigating the rotating platforms in the bottom path, which feels backward for 2D Sonic. And the branching path in the 3D section is just a chain of enemies that, when homing attacked, leads to a hallway skipping a chunk of the level and rewarding you a red ring in the process. The level design gets 2 stars since the 3D section is comprised solely of half pipes that you're meant to boost across but are pretty easy to fall off of. Though I criticized Mystic Jungle for how it looks before, I do quite like how the bright neon lit buildings look under the moonlight in this 2D section. It's a nice contrast to the burning forest in the background. The Snake QuickTime event is fine, but nothing to write home about. 3 stars for presentation. The number rings are a bit tricky to get, as you have to carefully navigate the moving platforms to collect them in order. Having the silver rings on another set of moving platforms on the same path is a bit uninspired, however, and the red rings aren't particularly challenging either. 3 stars for collectibles. The stage starts with Knuckles commenting on the downpour of bombs in Mystic Jungle. I think the Resistance is holding the enemy forces back while Sonic closes on Infinite, so that's why they're all worried about the bombs. Amy locates Infinite and Sonic heads for the ruins, but not before doing it out with a giant snake. This is the best use of in-level dialogues I've seen thus far, which honestly says a lot about how useless this feature was. I used to think the coolest part of Sonic Forces was how the characters spoke to one another and advanced the narrative as you played through each level, but I realize now that this kind of storytelling destroys the concept of show don't tell. The level would be constantly dragging to a halt if it were to actually show what the characters are commenting on, but having the characters comment on something the player can't see forces them to visualize the scene in their head, so the level design is often dumbed down to reduce the need for multitasking. This might be as good as it gets for those mid-level narratives, but it still amounts to little more than narrowing the method of attack in Mystic Jungle down to bombs. 4 stars for narrative. Total score for Stage 8 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 9, Mystic Jungle vs. Infinite. This stage takes place after Sonic saves Silver and Infinite formally introduces himself to the Resistance. The battle takes place on the giant snake from the previous level. If you look closely, the gravitational pull of the snake and the large round springs are mechanics both ripped from Sonic Lost World, but honestly I never even noticed until the writing of this script. This is a good example of asset reuse, and though the flat cylindrical layout of the stage can get a bit repetitive, the added difficulty from dodging Phantom Ruby illusions adds a bit of much needed variety. 4 stars for level design. Again, the stage itself being a big snake is cool, but the animation when transitioning from the snake to the springs is very stilted, and Sonic jitters every which way. 2 stars for presentation. This is the level where Sonic calls Infinite a mech, but obviously the writers couldn't commit to this angle for Infinite. 1 star for narrative. Infinite isn't really a threat in this battle, you just need to boost to get close and mash A when you see the homing attack icon. Most of the challenge comes from dodging his illusions, which when hit, cause Sonic to transition to a virtual reality, where Infinite is invulnerable and even more obstacles block Sonic's path. I like the idea of a mind-bending obstacle that serves to slow Sonic down rather than outright defeat him, but in practice it makes a no damage run the easiest and ideal method of taking down Infinite. 3 stars for Boss AI. Total score for Stage 9 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 15, City, Sunset Heights. This stage takes place after Vector spots Shadow wiping out Resistance forces, and Sonic decides to confront him. Anybody remember when this level was shown off before the game launched and it was met with a collective, "Oh, this isn't too bad for a tutorial level"? This is the literal half point of the game. Also, I'm just realizing that Sunset Heights is just the name of this stage specifically, while the area is simply referred to as City. That name is lame as hell though, so I'm going to continue to refer to it as Sunset Heights whenever I'm not naming stages. The 3D section is nothing to write home about. You have a hallway with a red ring you can homing attack to reach, then you're launched into another hallway and that just leads to a loop that takes you to a 2D section. I don't really know how to describe how this 2D section is designed. It's like they stacked some semi-solid platforms on top of one another and called it a day. This is the most run-of-the-mill Sonic level I've ever seen. This is what ChatGPT would output if you asked it to design a 3D Sonic stage. 3 stars for level design. I can't think of anything in particular to say about the red rings. The placement of the silver rings is pretty interesting, forcing you to navigate around this semi-solid platform. Placing the number rings on springs that launch you a sec distance isn't a good challenge though, it's just forcing the player to fight against finicky controls. 2 stars for collectibles. I like the camera work on this loop that Sonic takes in the middle of the stage, but I think the motionless shadow model at the end of the stage says everything you need to know about how it presents itself. 1 star for presentation. Sonic has a single line about finding Shadow, the rest of the text boxes are just other characters complaining about how many Death Egg robots are on the city. These lines add nothing to the plot, so I suppose they can be safely ignored. 3 stars for narrative. Total score for Stage 15 rounds down to 2 stars. Stage 21, Chemical Plant, Network Terminal. This stage takes place after Ava creates a distraction, allowing Sonic to remotely shut down the Death Egg's defenses when he reaches the computers. This stage starts with a maze of grind rails, springs, and hooks that carry you around. It doesn't really matter what path you take though, unless you're grinding the level for red rings. I accidentally broke the automation here, this has never happened to me before. Just thought that was interesting. The level then transitions to a 2D section inside the chemical plant. This section features a new gimmick of purple waterfalls that slow Sonic down and push spinning platforms around. I like that for once Sonic Forces is encouraging me to take my time when platforming, instead of expecting me to hold the X button until I reach the goal. 4 stars for level design. The presentation is overall really solid, from the high-speed rails and transport at the beginning, to the seamless transition from outside to inside, to the automated 2D sequences that oddly remind me of those Auto Mario levels from Super Mario Maker. I'm glad they modeled the computer room too, as we usually don't get the luxury of seeing these set pieces that aren't absolutely integral to the gameplay. 4 stars for presentation. Getting all the red rings is going to require repeat playthroughs, but the beginning is short enough that I don't really see it getting frustrating. I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to get this number ring. The silver rings are placed in between gaps with waterfalls, so you have to perfectly time collecting the first ring and book it so you aren't sent plummeting before the rest disappear. I'm going to go with an average score of 3 stars for collectibles. I really couldn't decide what else to say about them. The dialogue in this stage is mostly just a recap of what's currently happening in the story, so it's inoffensive. 3 stars for narrative. Total score for stage 21 rounds up to 4 stars. Stage 23, Metropolis, Metropolitan Highway. This stage takes place after the Resistance destroys the Death Egg. Oh look, the Mystic Jungle platforms are back. The only thing of note here is the 2D section that makes use of this new platform that darts in the direction of its arrow when stepped on, but it's over before it even gets good. 2 stars for level design. I like the part near the beginning when Sonic is dodging these big missiles. Again, they just pose a character model at the end of the stage so it stares at Sonic lifelessly, and it makes me uncomfortable. 2 stars for presentation. I like that the number rings kind of form a puzzle, I guess. I've really got nothing. I'm defaulting to 3 stars for collectibles. The dialogue here consists of pep talk and people telling Sonic they've got his back. Nothing egregious really, just character dialogue for the sake of character dialogue. 3 stars. Total score for stage 23 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 26, Eggman Empire Fortress, Motor Canyon. This stage takes place after Ava makes the fake sun disappear. I've poured blood, sweat, and tears into writing this script, and I simply can't dedicate any more energy to critiquing a level that can mostly be skipped with the air boost. I'm sorry. 1 star for level design. I can barely make out what's happening here, but what I do know is that these colors are so dull. 2 stars for presentation.
A huge enemy force is closing fast. We're falling under attack. Keep an eye on them.
Yeah, I just skipped a huge chunk of the level and got rewarded for it with a red ring. 1 star for collectibles. This stage contains the only build-up between Eggman's plan failing and Sonic's final encounter with Infinite, so for that I give the narrative 2 stars. Total score for stage 26 rounds up to 2 stars. Episode Shadow, Stage 1, City, Enemy Territory. This stage takes place after Rouge tells Shadow to meet up with Omega in the city. Alright, finally an easy one. Shadow is mechanically identical to modern Sonic, with the exception that he has one unique move. If there's a chain of enemies close together, using a homing attack on one of the enemies carries Shadow to the end of the line. This is effectively the Lightspeed Dash, but slightly trickier since rings are stationary and enemies aren't. Of course, it's very situational, but at least it has some amount of strategy. All of Shadow's stages are based on stages from the main campaign, so rather than ranking their level design and presentation as if they were unique stages, I'll instead be ranking them based on how much the level of difficulty pleased me. Besides, if I were to critique their presentation, they'd all get 1 star for retaining their war-torn looks despite the entire campaign taking place before Eggman's takeover. This stage is focused on weaving between spikes and reaching secrets with Shadow's homing attack. Not very difficult, but that's to be expected for a tutorial. 3 stars for difficulty. The red rings are mostly based on timing, so there's really no challenge if you have the stage memorized. The silver rings are too close to each other to really pose any challenge, so it's all riding on the number rings. Thrilling. 2 stars for collectibles. The narrative kicks off with Omega telling Rouge and Shadow that his extermination is proceeding smoothly. Rouge panics, reminding him that he's supposed to be on Raycon, but Shadow just brushes it off as Omega being the wrong pick for the job. As the level progresses, we can see, or rather hear, Omega malfunctioning, and talking about crazy things like Shadow's elimination. This is the standard that I think the radio dialogue should follow, bidding up mysteries and threats established in the main story without acting as a crutch for a plot point that cutscenes failed to properly establish. 5 stars for narrative. Total score for Episode Shadow, Stage 1 rounds down to 3 stars. Episode Shadow, Stage 2, Mystic Jungle, Eggman's Facility. This stage takes place after Infinite introduces himself to Shadow, and they flash back to their very first encounter. Nearly the entire stage takes place on these water slides. I'll be honest, I don't really care for this gimmick, and it's more frustrating than it is difficult. 1 star for difficulty. Without a mechanic to switch homing attack targets, these number rings just can't be collected reliably. Couple that with uninteresting red ring placements, and silver rings condensed on a slide that pushes you forward, and you're left with a completionist's nightmare. 2 stars for collectibles. The narrative mostly boils down to Eggman bitching about Shadow destroying his defenses, but what confused me is that Eggman would have all of his troops defending a base that he admits he was finished with. Also, he refers to the Phantom Ruby as a stone rather than a weapon, which seems to imply that it was going to be a naturally occurring gem instead of artificial. I don't know, the narrative gives 1 star for giving me a headache. Total score for Episode Shadow Stage 2 rounds down to 1 star. Episode Shadow Stage 3 Green Hill Virtual Reality. This stage takes place in the present, right after Infinite showcases his newfound powers on Shadow. The virtual reality obstacles are pretty good. You have spiraling circles that necessitate precise platforming, and energy beams that test your reaction time. 4 stars for difficulty, it's a fair bit more challenging than the main game. I personally think all the collectibles in this stage are overly reliant on homing attacks. 3 stars for collectibles. The narrative begins with Shadow stuck in a virtual reality projection made by Infinite. He hears the voice of a fake Rouge calling out to him. Rouge questions Shadow's sanity before reminding him that they're picking up Omega, who was supposedly destroyed 3 months ago. When Shadow reaches the scene of the crime, Rouge tells him that Omega was never actually destroyed. Now, Omega's voice echoes in Shadow's head, repeating the pleas of a broken Infinite. Once again, Episode Shadow is killing it in the dialogue department. 5 stars for narrative. Total score for Episode Shadow Stage 3 is 4 stars. Stage 3 City Ghost Town. This stage takes place right after Classic saves Tails from Chaos. Do I really have to explain to you guys how classic Sonic works? It's that old school single button philosophy. Press A to jump, press down and A to spin dash, and new to forces, press A in midair to drop dash. Classic Sonic doesn't get any extra moves or upgrades as the game progresses like in Sonic Generations, so there's really no evolution to the classic formula here. They even take away the instant spin dash from Gens to replace it with the drop dash, so really we're just moving backwards. And speaking of moving backwards, these physics are so ass. It's next to impossible to gain any momentum without rolling into a ball, and even then he's so stiff to control that you barely build up any speed regardless. I guess that's why this stage is littered with springs. Seriously, nearly every incline has a spring at the top, because Classic loses his momentum so easily in this game. I get that this is the first stage, but it practically feels like the level is playing itself. 2 stars for level design, and that's only because I'm being nice to tutorial levels. I've decided that I'm not going to rank classic levels on presentation. All of them have this flat 2D perspective that even the lamest Sonic Generations stage would put to shame. It would genuinely be a waste of time, because nearly every stage would get 1 star for doing nothing interesting with its camera angles. The red rings are all placed on the top path, discouraging players from exploring the bottom half of the stage. That's the opposite of what collectibles are supposed to encourage. 1 star for collectibles. The narrative focuses on Tails leading Classic towards Eggman's signal. I guess to figure out what Eggman's power is. Tails out here with the goated tips like, watch your step, we have to end the war, be careful. 2 stars for narrative. Total score for Stage 3 rounds up to 2 stars. Stage 10, Green Hill. Green Hill. This stage takes place after Tails picks up Eggman's signal, and before they learn about the Phantom Ruby prototypes and Eggman's plan to end the world. This is a step up from the first classic stage, with branching paths feeling like they actually kind of matter. You aren't just being glued to the top path unless you mess up a jump, so there's actually room to engage with the level design. Wait, this is just Generations Act 1. Okay, maybe it's not at Frontier's level of copying homework, but still this area is definitely taking a lot of inspiration from Gens. Well, it makes the level more varied. 3 stars for level design. I honestly feel like the red rings are doing the absolute bare minimum to encourage exploration here. I don't know how to explain it though, I'll just say 3 stars for collectibles. The narrative just consists of Tails recapping why they're on Green Hill, and a comment about the desertification of the place. 3 stars for narrative. Wow, that's the first time a stage has gotten a consistent score across the board. Total score for Stage 10 is 3 stars, even. Stage 11, Green Hill vs Eggman. Classic Sonic's first and only boss predictably takes place on a flat 2D plane. What else do you want me to say about this? 3 stars for level design. Eggman gloats about power that exceeds his expectations as he copies the easiest boss in series history. I honestly don't know what they were going for with Eggman's characterization here, and it doesn't help that he's paired up with a silent protagonist and the most one-note character in this game. 2 stars for narrative. The first boss is a fake out referencing the very first boss of Sonic 1, that's kind of cute. The real boss is against the Egg Dragoon for some reason. Before playing through Sonic Unleashed, I really thought the character designers busted out this totally unique robot design just to use it for this underwhelming fight. Anyways, this thing is barely an inconvenience. You just have to jump over gunshots and spin dash into rocks. Well, it's not a frustrating boss at the very least. 3 stars for boss AI. Total score for stage 11 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 13, Mystic Jungle, Casino Forest. Classic and Tails arrive here after overhearing that Infinite intercepted Sonic in that area. Ah yes, the obligatory pinball stage. Yippee. There isn't really a lot going on in the stage, so your opinion on the level design is going to depend heavily on how much you enjoy the physics of Force's classic Sonic. I don't enjoy the physics. 2 stars for level design. The red rings are, again, heavily reliant on the finicky physics, but apart from that, I like this little numbering puzzle, I guess. 3 stars for collectibles. The dialogue is just reminders from Tails that you're looking for modern Sonic, so there's not a lot going on in that department. 3 stars for narrative. Total score for stage 13 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 18, Chemical Plant. Chemical Plant. Jeez, who's coming up with these? This stage takes place after Amy informs Tails and Classic of the Eggman database in the Chemical Plant. I think this stage would have worked better as the classic Sonic tutorial than Ghost Town. For one, the reps are actually designed with Force's physics in mind, rather than utilizing a band-aid fix to emulate the Genesis physics. For better or for worse. There are 2 main paths throughout the stage, one that's a bit easier to traverse, and one that's a bit tricky to find but nets you some rewards. I think this stage is fine. 3 stars for level design. None of the collectibles are particularly challenging, but there were a couple that I had to think about how to nab. Again, this would have been better suited for a tutorial level. 3 stars for collectibles. The stage starts with Tails reminding Classic about the database they're looking for, and it ends with them finding said database, I guess. The narrative gets 1 star for every line they bothered to write. 2 stars. Total score for stage 18 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 22, Death Egg. Death Egg. This stage takes place after Sonic uses the computer and chemical plant to disable the weapons.
Hey, the defense system's still up. I thought we shut it down.
Forces to number 5, 1 star for narrative. These stage gimmicks are, of course, all lifted from the Death Egg in Sonic and Knuckles, but what can I say, they work well here. The need for precision platforming, good timing and patience brings me back to Sonic 1's Marble Garden Zone. Opinions on that zone are very divisive, but I actually like all of Sonic 1's bad stages, so I'll give the level design here 4 stars. What I said about Stage 18's collectibles can mostly be applied here. 3 stars for collectibles. Total score for Stage 22 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 28, Eggman Empire Fortress. Iron Fortress. This stage gets a lot of flack for being an auto-scroller, but I think they handled it fine enough here. It's a fairly short chunk of the stage, and it adds just the right amount of tension, especially if you're aiming for all red rings. Plus, auto-scrolling Sonic stages is an underrepresented niche, and any scenario where Sonic Forces doesn't shamelessly copy what worked before is a win in my book. Flinging yourself around with these spinning wheels is the first time I felt pure fun and whimsy playing this game. 4 stars for level design. The collectibles are, for the most part, suspended high in the air, so your enjoyment of completing this level is going to depend heavily on how fun you think the wheel physics are. Again, I quite like this gimmick, but it is admittedly a bit finicky for precise movement like this. 3 stars for collectibles. The narrative isn't all that interesting, we're just told that the Phantom Ruby signal is moving underground, and that the Resistance needs to find the entrance to the fortress. But I made a pretty big deal about how the game's story absolutely drops the ball during stages 28 and 29, failing to convey any vital information through more digestible and accessible methods like cutscenes. The narrative gets 1 star as a result. Total score for stage 28 rounds up to 3 stars.
Hold on, I'll send in reinforcements right away.
Wow! Having 2 Sonics is so dreamy.
What if Amy Rose was called Freaky Rose and she ate... Before we can begin critiquing Ava's stages, I have to actually make a character. Before I could just use a mod for the wolves, but since the gameplay segment of the video is unmodded, it's only fair that I engage with the character creator in good faith. I'm not a particularly talented artist, so I'll be judging the character creator by how accurately it allows me to recreate an existing Sonic character. namely the conductor's wife from the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. Here's the side-by-side. Obviously, you can see that the character creator is very limited in body shapes, as I was unable to represent even a slightly plus-sized Sonic character. The tones are all slightly off too, it's like I picked the worst possible character to judge this with. I wish there was a way to use hex codes for more precise colors, but I just had to make do. There aren't a lot of dress options, so for the outfit I just went with a dark brown coat and a red bodysuit. Keep in mind that I am playing on a 100% save file, so your options would be incredibly limited on a fresh save. The hair options are of course also very limited. I couldn't really recreate her ponytail things in a way that I was happy with, so I just gave her a headset to make her head feel less naked and called it a day. It's really sad that customization in 3D Sonic peaked here. Stage 2, Chemical Plant, Spaceport. This stage takes place after the Resistance receives confirmation that Sonic is alive, and they send Ava to capture a space shuttle. Ava's playstyle is similar to modern Sonic, though obviously they cannot boost. Instead, they have a weapon known as the Wisp Bomb. This gives the player a primary attack on R2 and a special move on Y, triggered by collecting wisps, what else? These special moves are similar in function to the color powers from Sonic Colors, which means that the level design is more open to compensate, but the Wisp Bomb lacks the ability to transform the player, meaning that any special abilities Ava can use are very limited and lack any creativity. Rather than designing abilities that allow the player to traverse the environment in unconventional ways, we instead get about a half dozen vertical movement options that are only useful for the occasional branching path or hidden red ring. To compensate for the very situational nature of Wisp abilities, the base attack of most Wisp Bombs is completely overpowered, or rather the enemies are underpowered, as the game is trying to awkwardly squeeze combat situations out of enemies designed to be defeated by Sonic in a single hit. Gee, what a thoughtful gameplay formula. Ava also doesn't have a double jump by default. Each species type has a special attribute tied to it, encouraging the player to experiment with different character customizations. For example, the dog species lets the player keep some rings after dying. I didn't go as far as editing my avatar throughout the game, but I did make sure to swap out my Wisp Bomb after every stage to give each type a fair chance and to fact check the consensus I've heard for years that the Fire Wisp Bomb is severely OP and the only one you'd ever need to complete the game. There's like nothing to this stage. You just spend the entire time being funneled down literal hallways filled with groups of enemies that you need to spam your weapon on, and the stage ends with the Grind Row section from Tropical Resort Act 1. What an oddly low effort level for a completely original character. 2 stars for level design. Ava's stages have a major focus on presentation when compared to the other characters, and this stage is certainly no exception. Though the level design makes it feel rather flat, it does at least have a neat QuickTime event, though it's always bothered me that the prompt occurs after Ava dodges the train and not during. Like, what are you aiming at here, girly? 3 stars for presentation. A pattern I'm sure you'll notice as we cover Ava is the fact that most of the collectibles are contingent on you bringing in the correct Wisp Bomb type beforehand, so there isn't really any skill required, you just have to have the Wisp Bomb abilities memorized. Yeah, I feel like this is a poor introduction to collectibles as a concept. 2 stars for collectibles.
No, wait! Watch out! The masked one's here. The monster that took down Sonic.
What? Why is Infinite there? This doesn't build up to an encounter or anything, they don't even mention it after the fact. I hate having so little to say about these narratives, but there's genuinely so little that happens in these conversations that there's hardly anything of worth to critique. 2 stars for narrative. Total score for Stage 2 rounds down to 2 stars. Stage 4, Death Egg, Prison Hall. This stage takes place after the Resistance learns of Eggman's intentions to banish Sonic into space, and kicks their breakout plan into motion. For this stage, I had the Hover Wisp Bomb equipped. The bulk of the stage takes place within a single 2D segment, the rest of it is mostly automated. The platform in this stage is fine, but I wasn't a huge fan of the gimmicks constantly pulling you up and down. Honestly, the first stage should have been omitted and this should have been the tutorial. 3 stars for level design. I can't believe we've gotten to the point where drifting and sidestepping are relegated to automated visual flair now, but it does help the stage stand out from the rest of the swap this game has to offer. 3 stars for presentation. There are some really well placed collectibles in this stage. You have red rings that require careful maneuvering while Ava is drifting, a number ring puzzle where you have to traverse around the center platform to collect the rings in order, and a string of silver rings guiding you through the fastest path on this sidestepping auto runner. 4 stars for collectibles. The narrative in this stage is actually pretty good. You have the Resistance making comments on the appearance of the prison, how long it's been running, and the implications it holds for the fates of their comrades. They resolve that Eggman's treatment of their peers will be one more thing he answers for. It's simple yet effective. 4 stars for narrative. Total score for Stage 4 rounds up to 4 stars. Stage 12, City, Park Avenue. This stage takes place after Knuckles sends Ava on a solo mission to save the civilians of Sunset Heights. For this stage, I had the Lightning Wisp on equipped. This is essentially a copy of Stage 15, or rather, Stage 15 copied this stage. The main difference is that the 2D section is longer, and extends further throughout and underneath Sunset Heights. For all intents and purposes, this is just a better version of modern Sonic's Sunset Heights, so I'm just going to give the level design 4 stars. Apart from a couple of neat camera angles, this is one of the more tame Ava levels cinematically speaking. 2 stars for presentation. I like this numbering puzzle placed in a tight corridor with a handful of enemies blocking the way. It felt like the stage was actually designed to accommodate it, rather than the collectibles just being plopped haphazardly into an existing layout. The red rings are particularly exciting though, just a guessing game of which Wisp-On you'd need. 3 stars for collectibles. The narrative boils down to the Resistance being hesitant of Ava, and then they suddenly change their mind halfway into the level, and now they're all like, "You go girl!" It's not egregious, just funny. 3 stars for narrative. Total score for Stage 12 is 3 stars. Stage 14, Mystic Jungle, Aqua Road. This stage takes place after the Resistance picks up 2 life readings in the jungle, who we later find out are Tails and Classic. For this stage, I had the Void Wisp-On equipped. Again, I really don't like this water slide mechanic. Everything I said about the episode Shadow variant of this stage can be applied here. 1 star for level design. I don't want to insinuate that this stage has bad presentation. There are some shots I like, but this is by far the weakest of the Ava stages so far. 2 stars for presentation. Some of the collectibles are a pain to collect due to the water, and some of them are complete guesswork. Either way, there's really nothing of substance in this level. 1 star for collectibles. The narrative is the one saving grace of this stage. There's nothing that detracts from the main objective, it's just some nice flavor text about the stage and the character seeing Ava in action. 4 stages for narrative. Total score for Stage 14 is 2 stars. Stage 16, Metropolis, Capital City. This stage is the notorious Operation Big Wave. For this stage, I had the Drill Wisp-On equipped. I actually quite like the design of this stage. The 2D segments making use of multiple fields of gravity, the 3D segments taking place on the sides of skyscrapers and the undersides of bridges, this grind rail section that gets abruptly cut off by a Slenderman Infinite. I love how surreal this stage is and how it plays into the painfully underdeveloped illusion theme the Phantom Ruby introduced. Though it's genuinely not challenging in the slightest, so I'll have to settle for giving this stage 4 stars. The presentation though, oh my god, I love how the stage starts with Infinite and Ava confronting in the air, only for the Phantom Ruby to kick in and throw the Resistance into dismay. There are so many great sequences and background details that sell the liminal feeling of the stage so well, and a ton of creative shots that had me in genuine awe. How is this Sonic Forces? 5 stars for presentation. Unfortunately, that is where my praise for this stage ends. The collectibles for one are either reliant on guesswork or completely trivial. 2 stars for collectibles. Do I even need to explain why this is genuinely the worst narrative in this game? It would be bad enough if it was just Knuckles getting most of the forces killed and sending them off with a womp womp, but the fact that they'd actually go with something as cataclysmic as an implied genocide and devote 0% of the level design or presentation to actually supporting that plot point is baffling. And then they just brush it off in future cutscenes? This narrative is so dogshit that it breaks the scales and gets a 0-star rating somehow. Total score for Stage 16 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 17, Metropolis vs. Infinite. This stage takes place right after the cutscene where Ava stands up to Infinite for the first time. For this stage, I have the Asteroid Wisp-On equipped. Ava's first and only boss predictably takes place on a flat 2D plane. Wait, that's what I said about classic Sonic, but this is a character who exists in 3D space. Why would you do this? There's literally nothing to critique, it's just a literal hallway with nothing in it. I guess I'll have to go with 3 stars. It's the most mediocre score I can give something. What do I even say for this presentation? I can't just not talk about it. I guess this zoom in of his face is something? I don't know, 2 stars?
Well, well. It seems behind that fear is a spark of light. spies. I feel like we've met before.
Literally, the cutscene prior established that Infinite damn well remembers Ava. Don't fucking play dumb with me. 1 star for narrative. Infinite's gimmick of attacks that force the player into an illusion remains intact for this boss fight, but you wouldn't even be able to tell because you can beat his ass in 40 seconds flat. All because I happened to get the wisp on this fight was designed around by sheer luck. There's no real point to critiquing the difficulty of this fight, because there's no reason not to play with the busted wisp on once you know which one it is. 1 star for boss AI. Total score for stage 17 rounds up to 2 stars. Stage 20, Green Hill, Guardian Rock. This stage takes place after the Resistance plans to shut down the Death Egg's defenses while Ava acts as a distraction. For this stage, I had the Cube Wisp on equipped. This stage is entirely 2D, which is lame. There's a few branching paths, but be honest, is the prospect of branching paths in a game with nothing level designs interesting to you on principle alone? 3 stars for level design. I like the fact that the stage has a visual gimmick, with the huge crab robot's legs being obstacles you have to dodge, and the end featuring a face-off with said robot. 3 stars for presentation. Would you believe me if I said the process for collecting the red rings in this stage is, gasp, guesswork? 3 stars for collectibles. The distraction subplot could have been used to write anything here, but I'm glad they put the spotlight on a unique enemy design. 3 stars for narrative. Total score for stage 20 is an even 3 stars. Stage 25, Eggman Empire Fortress, Imperial Tower. This stage takes place after Tails theorizes that the Phantom Ruby prototype can be used to neutralize the fake sun. For this stage, I had the Cube Wisp on equipped. For the final Ava stage, it is a bit more linear than I would have liked, but I do appreciate that all of the Wisp-on types are represented here, giving you some freedom in how you can approach the platforming. 3 stars for level design. The presentation isn't as strong here as in previous stages, but I do like the impending sense of doom that these massive laser walls provide. 3 stars for presentation. While the variety of Wisp-ons does mean that there's a lot of ways you could go about collecting these red rings, the reality is what little strategy there was to bringing the right Wisp-on for the job is lost here. Some of these collectibles are way too close as well. 2 stars for collectibles. The dialogue here sees the Resistance slowly lift their spirits as they realize Ava has a real chance of saving the world. There's really nothing to it, but what can I say? This makes me feel good. 4 stars for narrative. Total score for stage 25 is 3 stars. Stage 7, Green Hill, Arsenal Pyramid. This stage takes place after Sonic returns to Earth and is paired with Ava to take down Eggman's weapons factory. For this stage, I had the Fire Wisp on equipped. Here we are, the home stretch. We have 6 main stages left to cover. The tag team stages, which see modern Sonic and Ava team up to tackle the biggest threats this game has to offer. We've covered out both Ava and modern control, so just imagine a version of Ava who could double jump and boost. This is a deceptively simple stage. We start with the elusive double-decker hallway, a short drift, and then we're thrown straight into Double Boost. Double Boost is a mechanic exclusive to the tag team stages that have Sonic and Ava combine their speed because they can. Yeah, these sections are underbaked and provide no challenge. They're literally glorified QuakeTime events. But hey, at least the inside of the pyramid is more interesting. There are various branching paths based on whether you use the burst ability, lightning ability, or decide to platform normally. Pretty good for a tutorial stage. 4 stars for level design. The presentation of this stage mostly hinges on the player finding the idea of Double Boost to be badass, but I think everyone and their mother agrees that this is lame as hell. 2 stars for presentation. Do I need to explain why having silver rings, number rings, and a red ring in the single skydiving section is a nightmare? Holy shit, who approved this? 1 star for collectibles. The narrative just serves to remind the player that the pyramid is, in fact, the weapons factory the Resistance is trying to destroy. It's whatever. 3 stars for narrative. Total score for Stage 7 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 19, City, Red Gate Bridge. This stage takes place after the Resistance spots Metal Sonic flying above Sunset Heights. For this stage, I had the Asteroid Wisp on equipped. Don't be fooled by the name of the stage, this is just a boss fight against Metal Sonic. It takes place on this backdrop inspired by the Golden Gate Bridge, which is pretty cool, and it suits the Autorunner boss theme they were going for. 4 stars for level design. Why did they go so hard on this animation? I almost thought that Sonic and Ava were going to duel with a giant Death Egg robot for a second. The boss itself doesn't really play with the camera much, they put their whole present tussie into the opening. 3 stars for presentation. Who in the fuck is going to be replaying a boss battle for collectibles? 1 star, because this shit would infuriate me if I were doing a legit 100% run right now. There's literally no narrative because Metal Sonic doesn't speak, but a lack of bullshit is better than bullshit. 2 stars for narrative. The boss itself is fairly challenging. You have to sidestep to avoid obstacles, boost to get closer to Metal Sonic while watching your gauge, and chain homing attacks to damage him. Maybe a boss battle 2/3 into the game should be more challenging, but at this point I'm just happy that this game is stimulating my brain at all. 3 stars for boss AI. Total score for stage 19 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 24, Metropolis, no space. You'll never guess what major plot point this stage occurs after. For this stage, I had the Asteroid Wisp-On equipped, as well as an SOS avatar with a Fire Wisp-On. After escaping the void with nothing but a double boost somehow, Sonic and Ava tackle a maze of grind rails and a couple of hordes of enemies. There are some interesting alternate paths you can take, but unfortunately this stage is held back by those enemy encounters that are barely blocking the path you have to take. 3 stars for level design. I really do like the design of No Space. For as little of it as we see, it really does feel like a vast, desolate void. The rest of the stage is whatever, so I'll just give the presentation 3 stars. There are a bunch of branching paths at the beginning, each requiring a different Wisp-On type, so I'm assuming each one would net you a different red ring. I honestly don't know, I somehow went the entirety of the stage without picking up a single one. I'm going with my default score of 3 stars for collectibles. If you're angry at that, do your own Forces review, womp womp. Unfortunately, this otherwise solid level was brought down by its incredibly nonchalant handling of what should have been the climax of Sonic and Ava's friendship. I can't in good faith give the narrative here anything higher than 1 star. Total score for Stage 24 rounds up to 3 stars. Stage 27, Eggman Empire Fortress vs. Infinite. This stage takes place after Sonic passes through Mortar Canyon. For this stage, I had the Cube Wisp-On equipped. Here we are, the final bout against Infinite, the game's illusory big bad. Hey, get this shit off my screen, I want to see a true climactic battle. Oh no. So, yeah, this is just the Metal Sonic fight again, only this time it takes place on a dreary, uninspired gray bridge. 3 stars for level design. The presentation is also a step down from Metal's fight, but I do like that this fight starts with Sonic alone, and Ava is given an introductory cutscene at the halfway mark, so I'll still give it 3 stars for presentation. You at least tried. The narrative kick starts with some trash talk between Infinite and Sonic. Later, Infinite gets the upper hand as Sonic is knocked back. That's when Ava makes her entrance, aiding Sonic with the power of friendship so that he can defeat the ultimate mercenary once and for all. This is about what I'd expect from a major boss. 3 stars for narrative. This boss is structured the same as Metal Sonic's, only with the inclusion of Infinite's illusion attacks. Though again, this just means that Infinite's default attacks have to be easier to accommodate the difficulty spike when getting hit. It's about as difficult, if not slightly easier, than Metal. 3 stars for boss AI. Total score for Stage 27 is an even 3 stars. Stage 29, Eggman Empire Fortress, Final Judgment. This stage takes place after Classic Sonic finds the entrance to the fortress. For this stage, I had the Hover Wisp-On equipped. This stage wants to be terminal velocity so bad, but it's painfully slow. You have to have a damn good reason to base your entire stage on sidestepping and grind rails, and the tension and tight timing just isn't there to pull it off. 2 stars for level design. Presentation.
Time to head back. Everyone's waiting for us.
Two stars for presentation. The collectibles are contingent on timing, which, fair enough. 3 stars for collectibles. Amy talks about finding a reactor that hasn't been brought up before this point, and says they found the site where Eggman built Infinite. It's a bad writing double whammy. 1 star for narrative. Total score for Stage 29 is 2 stars. Well, here we are. After covering every single plot point, analyzing every poor writing choice, diving into nearly every piece of content in this game, reviewing every single main game stage, including 3 DLC stages assigned to Shadow the Hedgehog, determining the amount of artistic value present, discussing Sonic Forces for twice as long as it takes to play through the entire game, probably 3 times as long at this point. By the time I wrote this section I was expecting a 2-hour video, but we're already over 2 hours. I've put more hours into Sonic Forces on Steam than I have into my most anticipated game of the past 7 years, Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I was truly in the trenches making this video. With only the final boss left to cover, let's finally wrap up this overly comprehensive review of Sonic Forces. What? What could you possibly want right now? Hold on, slow down, I can't understand you. Shadow Generations? Yeah, it was demoed at Summer Games Fest. They're saying what? They're comparing this level design to Sonic Forces? You're telling me that Gen Z is trying to cancel Shadow Generations? I did not spend the past hour giving every single stage in the game a critical look just to be told that this is not in any way an improvement over that game. So, let's see if I can't clear up some misconceptions surrounding Shadow Generations. Alright, I know what you're thinking. Even now as I'm writing this, the Shadow Gens discourse is hardly relevant. Anyone who was comparing the level design of Shadow Generations to Sonic Forces has either shut up ever since more gameplay has come out, or has moved on to something else while waiting for the game to release. But as someone who's written about 18 pages of Sonic Forces level critique, I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to discuss what is and isn't Sonic Forces level design. Besides, I was going to have to touch on this topic eventually, whether it was in this video or my eventual review of Sonic X Shadow Generations. And according to a poll I held a few days ago on Twitter, the majority of my followers wanted to see this segment in this video, so I hope y'all are happy at least. Besides already having extensive knowledge of the level design of Sonic Forces, I wanted to write this intermission for two reasons. 1. To determine if I have a good grasp on just how bland the stages in Sonic Forces are compared to other games in the series, and 2. To better understand how and why Sonic Forces has caused discussions within the Sonic fandom to become less intelligent. For example, the baffling consensus that the most harsh criticisms of a Sonic game are also the logical endpoint for those who showed excitement for and/or defended the game before launch, i.e. the Sonic cycle. My 2 cents on the matter is that the Sonic cycle simply doesn't exist, or at the very least the version of it that the fandom describes. Sonic fans are stuck in this juxtaposition where they have to struggle and fight to be considered a healthy community, yet they counterintuitively treat completely normal fandom behavior as a brand of toxicity wholly unique to the Sonic fandom. This is nothing short of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, sorry to burst your bubble, but it's just human nature for strong opinions to mellow out over a long period of exposure to the subject. Positive opinions and negative opinions gradually shift towards a more neutral general consensus, but social media, ever the toxic hellhole, will always push the vocal minority onto our screens, as they're the audience most susceptible to backlash and flame wars. In short, the vocal minority holds an overly critical opinion of a highly anticipated game. Said opinion is ridiculed by majority rule, and as the minority grows more fond of the game and the majority feels their hype starting to fade away, an even smaller and louder minority of people who held onto that critical opinion all that time crown themselves the rightful winners of a long since past argument. This isn't a Sonic cycle, this is just an average Tuesday on Twitter. And the oversaturation of misused and frankly meaningless buzzwords certainly doesn't help matters. Oh my god, where's the ambition? The momentum just isn't there at all. The game's giving Sonic Forces. Like, goddamn, just tell me what your complaint is. I have no idea where that voice came from, but I'm gonna keep it in. I think it's funny. I saw something similar happen back when the Sonic Frontiers hype was in full force. People comparing or straight up equating the level designs of Frontiers to Sonic Forces, even though that's objectively impossible. Sonic Frontiers can't have Forces level design when it lifts stages from Unleashed Generations and Adventure 2. And even if you interpret that sentiment as, oh well, the gameplay of Sonic Frontiers is following the philosophies of Forces by being too safe and bland, that sentiment is still a stretch. I honestly believe that gameplay-wise, at least, Sonic Forces is a game that stands for nothing. You can't adapt a lack of effort when deciding what direction to take your franchise in. You can be directionless, which Forces and Frontiers both are to varying degrees, but you're not going to produce consistent results by throwing the rulebook out the window. Sonic Forces level design is a complaint that has absolutely no meaning beyond the most surface level opinion of, well, I don't like this level design. Now, don't get me wrong, I take no issue with anyone who criticizes the way Shadow Generations looks or plays. In fact, I wholly expect people to be discontent or outright disappointed with what Shadow Generations has to offer. Like I said before, it's only natural for opinions to shift over time. What really grinds my gears though is the sentiment that disagreeing with any piece of criticism towards a product is an inherent defense of said product. A display of toxic positivity, as it were. Shadow Generations has Sonic Force's level design is not an opinion, it's a claim. A clear-cut comparison being drawn between two products in an attempt to prop up a particular opinion with supposed facts. And to be unable to point this out without having toxic positivity and Sonic Cycle regurgitated en masse in your replies is a perfect example of how Sonic Forces has single-handedly made discussions within the Sonic fandom unbearable by giving everyone some form of PTSD. Another thing that really grinds my gears is the subclass of Sonic fans who try to hold the moral high ground with their criticisms of an upcoming release by telling people who are excited to play it that they need to be protected from disappointment. Because dear God, what would I do with myself if Sonic X Shadow Generations, available on all major platforms this October, was made? Besides, play Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, Sonic Origins Plus, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Sonic Frontiers The Final Horizon, Sonic Superstars, Sonic Dream Team, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Penny's Big Breakaway, Princess Peach Showtime, Pepper Grinder. All great platformers that have released within the past year or so. Point being, I have plenty of games to play, trust me, I'll be fine if I happen to have a mid-ass game in my library. Case in point. All of this to say, I don't want to dismiss anyone's interpretations of media. I also don't want to see any of you dismissing others' interpretations on all sides of all debates. And I believe that in order to promote speaking subjectively, we all need to have a talk about how opinions can and should be subject to criticisms, just the same as the products which spawn said opinions. And I don't mean dismissive and vague criticisms like toxic positivity and negativity, Sonic Cycle, and switching up. I mean the real English dictionary that we all speak with. For example, if you want to compare the level design of Shadow Generations to Sonic Forces, then I'll kindly explain to you in detail why that is a completely inaccurate comparison to make. Not because I think you're wrong for disliking Shadow Generations, but because I don't think you understand just how good we have it now compared to then. I'll be covering the level design, presentation, and narrative of the first stage of Shadow Generations to the best of my ability, using secondhand footage from the Summer Games Fest as reference. This footage comes courtesy of Choctopus DX on YouTube. I'll be comparing each metric to similar stages from other Sonic games, especially Sonic Forces, and determining a score for the stage based on how well I personally believe Shadow Generations captures the essence of the Sonic series in each category. I'll be using the first stage of Episode Shadow as a frame of reference, with altered scores based on the same standards that I'll be holding Shadow Generations to. Episode Shadow Stage 1 receives 2 stars for level design, 1 star for presentation, and 4 stars for narrative. Total score for Episode Shadow Stage 1 rounds down to 2 stars. Without further ado, let's cover Shadow Generations Space Colony Arc. Since every character in Sonic Forces received a brief rundown of their playstyle, it's only fair that I at least attempt to deconstruct the gameplay and mechanics of Shadow Generations. Unsurprisingly, Shadow controls pretty identical to modern Sonic in Sonic Generations, in that he has a boost gauge which refills as the player collects rings. The abundance of speed places Shadow Generations firmly into the camp of the obstacle course approach, along with Unleashed and the OG generations. One major difference is that defeating enemies doesn't contribute to the boost meter, but rather a secondary meter centered at the bottom of the screen. There are also capsules which automatically fill out said meter, which I'll refer to as Chaos Capsules. The secondary meter, when at max, can be used to activate Chaos Control, which in this game freezes time for 5 seconds. This allows Shadow to navigate around dangerous obstacles and even turn them into makeshift platforms to create new paths. Shadow also receives a new move as part of his base moveset, the Chaos Snap, a variation of the homing attack which sees Shadow teleport directly to his target. This can be used to teleport through walls, further expanding Shadow's movement options. Already this is a vast improvement from Episode Shadow's pitiful Lightspeed Dash knockoff, which should be more than enough for Shadow Generations to put Forces to shame. But for good measure, let's continue on with the level critique. The level begins with a short grind rail section showcasing the space colony arc behind Shadow, then quickly transitions into a brief hallway, with another rail overhead likely serving as a shortcut. The game pressures you to homing attack the robots to reach the boosters, but a keen viewer might notice the array of boxes just behind the first robot, leading to yet another branching path. Both paths seemingly merge onto one road, leading to a green wall which has its own gravitational pull. After that is another split path, with the camera shifting to focus on a chain of asteroids and obscuring a path to the right. These springs in the top right corner seem to indicate that both paths merge together mere inches away from their starting positions. The short length of these branching paths are a contributing factor to the comparisons to Sonic Forces, but Shadow Generation certainly has that game beat in numbers alone. In Sonic Forces, you are lucky to find a stage with more than 2 branching paths, and 9 times out of 10, the second path is either a single red ring placed in an incredibly inconvenient spot, or a shortcut that lets you skip a quarter of the stage for free. If I may build on the hallway analogy used by so many other Sonic fans, Sonic Forces is a building entirely comprised of empty hallways that lead nowhere. Every so often, you're teased with a door that promises some much needed variety, only for the room to contain nothing of note, leaving you with no option but to take the exit back into the equally empty hallway. The thing is, though, you can't design a building without hallways. You may find 1 or 2 ballrooms among the sea of skyscrapers that contains one big space, but you'll always find that behind that big space is a small maze of hallways serving as the backbone of the entire establishment. That is the nature of designing a linear platformer. You can't avoid, well, linear paths. Therefore, pointing out hallways in a Sonic game is a fruitless endeavor. You can't just say a building contains hallways and expect the world to turn on the architects. You have to take into account the different rooms, windows, and floors to get the whole picture. Sonic Unleashed and Generations are games full of hallways, but what makes those hallways engaging is that they often split into 2 or 3 different paths, ensuring that no one playthrough is exactly the same. You also have large rooms with windows on all sides, allowing the player to engage with the world outside of the limited space Sonic has to run around on. These automated sections, another thing which Sonic Forces doesn't know how to use in moderation, work in the older games because they don't exist merely to push the player further down a hallway. They serve to give the player a break from the constant barrage of obstacles, to reward the player for making it this far. Sonic Colors is unique in that, like Sonic Forces, it's a building that's mostly comprised of hallways. But by using wisps to traverse the architecture in unconventional ways, you're often leaping through windows and taking ladders to different floors to discover new paths and interesting rooms. And Sonic Frontiers would be the aforementioned ballroom, offering a large open space for occupants to explore, with the employee backrooms offering a sense of normalcy for those who are more used to traditional buildings. See how all of the Sonic Boost games utilize hallways in unique ways to create a brand new type of architecture, except Sonic Forces? Hallways are the means to an end, but Sonic Forces has no direction to point its occupants in. It's all hallways for the sake of keeping unwitting consumers marching on through. Shadow Generations may have issues with branching paths needing more room to grow, but so far I see a real vision behind the architecture. Now, where were we? Right there. After another brief grind rail section, Shadow is led to a path with some regular ground and a green wall which would allow for a shortcut. And I think that's enough of the play-by-play. After that whole rant, I'm sure y'all see where I was getting at with the hallway level design. I'll just skim through the rest of the playthrough and list off some areas that piqued my interest. Here we have a barrage of missiles, acting as this stage's main gimmick, besides the green walls. Using the Chaos Capsule just ahead to refill the Chaos Control Meter, the game encourages you to freeze time to use the missiles as platforms. If you cross the gap quick enough, you can just barely squeeze past this wall of missiles blocking the path forward, rewarding the player for mastery of the Chaos Control mechanic. Just ahead is a hallway bombarded by a rainfall of missiles. You're given another Chaos Control capsule to weave around the falling missiles before reaching a spring that launches Shadow onto the firing platform, putting the player in a precarious situation if they aren't paying attention to the Chaos Control meter. Launching off of this platform, the player has the opportunity to create a shortcut out of a long stretch of missiles, shaving seconds off of their time. Eventually, Shadow ends up inside the arc, which as you can see contains ramps without any springs or boost pads. Boost games, especially Sonic Forces, tend to rely heavily on automation to keep the player from breaking the game physics, so it's refreshing to see level design that encourages launching Sonic, or Shadow, into the air using momentum. This room is massive. Holy shit, this feels like an actual location in Sonic's world, and not just a truncated video gamey version of an existing area. I can't wait to have this game in my hands so I can explore all of the different paths here. Eventually, Shadow finds himself in front of Doom's Eye, who transports him to a radical highway, or at least that's what I assume this area is since that's the leitmotif playing in the music here. This section also received a lot of criticism and comparisons to Sonic Forces, but this isn't the gameplay of Shadow Generations. This is a pseudo cutscene state in which Shadow's movement is limited. You can even see that Chaos Control is disabled, and the gameplay is overall simplified to accommodate for the narrative taking place. Therefore, I'm going to count the level design as everything that occurred before this point. And for all of that, I'm going to give the level design 4 stars. This is a near perfect 3D Sonic tutorial in my eyes, trumped only by City Escape, which has level design that not only eases the player into the gameplay loop, but grounds the world in a sense of realism before jumping to out of this world insanity like the Ark. As mentioned before, the stage starts with a shot of the Ark behind Shadow. Apparently Shadow speaks this first line through the PlayStation 5's DualSense controller, which is a nice touch. Sure, it's superfluous, as it's a feature that only one of 4 platforms can use, but I think it goes to show that the developers cared about the little details. Can I just say that the environment here looks phenomenal. It's like the strong art direction of Sonic Generations, and the ahead of its time graphical fidelity of Unleashed had a baby. I might need to rescind my earlier comment on Forces being ahead of the rest when it comes to looks. As you may or may not have noticed, this stage takes place entirely in 3D. One point I've tried to make clear in this video and my Sonic Colors video is how flat and uninspired the 2D level design in Boost Sonic games tends to be. While it can be done tastefully, as the companion to Shadow Generations proves many a time, it's simply reassuring to see a 3D Sonic game that doesn't rely on limiting player and camera movements to save resources. It gives the Ark plenty of room to expand into this awe-inspiring set piece that feels like a real part of Sonic's world. At one point in the level, a massive missile fires directly at Shadow, prompting a QuickTime event in which Shadow unleashes a flurry of kicks and punches to clear the path ahead. I know that Sonic Forces didn't introduce QuickTime events to the series, but I can't help but look back at that game and its pitiful implementation of QuickTime events. Oftentimes, the timing of button presses would hardly match what was happening on the screen, or the scene wouldn't be animated enough to make your actions feel effective. At around the midpoint of the level, Doom's Eye appears to transition Shadow into Radical Highway, prompting a cutscene of sorts. After a trippy transition scene showcasing a maze of skyscrapers engulfing Shadow, the player is sent onto a linear path to chase Doom's Eye. As they exchange dialogue, the level design shifts from focusing on obstacles to making use of jumps and chaos snaps to land on different branching paths. This more simplified level design allows for a myriad of incredible camera angles and shots. Oddly enough, Shadow Generations is handling yet another feature in Sonic Forces far better than that game ever did. Whereas Sonic Forces would relay information to the player mid-level by showing them nothing and dumping exposition on them, Shadow Generations is not only having Doom's Eye interact with Shadow, but offering a simplified yet engaging gameplay experience, and even a unique mechanic in which Shadow slides down the sides of a skyscraper with opportunities for airtime. Once Shadow is able to corner Doom's Eye and destroy his shield, he obtains the logo for Shadow the Hedgehog 2005, I guess, and is sent through the floor back inside the Ark. Holy hell, you can really feel the increased budget from Sonic Frontiers. I'm shocked that this game is a whole $10 less, while being infinitely more captivating from a visual standpoint. 5 stars for presentation. For the gameplay segment of Sonic Forces, I tried to judge every stage's narrative based on how much it added or took away from the overarching story taking place within cutscenes and world map dialogues. But because I don't know how Shadow Generations will present its story, I can't judge the narrative of Space Colony Ark in that context. Therefore, I'm purely going by vibes for the score, and unfortunately, this stage didn't really leave me all that interested in what's to come. Shadow has a single line at the start about tracking someone or something down and not letting it get away. The entire Ark section occurs, then Shadow runs into Doom's Eye. He doesn't really seem all that shocked at his return, just disgusted. The scene transitions to Radical Highway, then Doom's Eye starts monologuing, primarily about plot beats from Shadow the Hedgehog 2005, which Shadow Gens is adapting, like The Promised Time, Shadow's Fate, etc, etc. I can certainly tell the writers are setting up something intriguing, but this particular narrative feels a lot more like fanservice for fans of the 2005 Shadow game than a strong standalone arc for the character Shadow. 3 stars for narrative. This is the one category that the episode Shadow equivalent beats Shadow Jensen due to its tasteful use of Rouge and Omega to set up crucial plot beats for Infinite's character arc. Total score for Shadow Generation's Space Colony arc is 4 stars. Stage 30, Eggman Empire Fortress vs. Death Egg Robot. This stage begins with Classic atop a bridge of moving purple blocks. The deformed Death Egg Robot shoots lasers that disintegrate the top layer of blocks and throws rocks that destroy entire columns of blocks. If Classic jumps into one of the rocks, it will be deflected, damaging the robot instead of the blocks. As you whittle away at the robot's health, its counterattacks become more frequent and more devastating. Even as the ground crumbles beneath him, Classic is able to deal the finishing blow to the robot. The Death Egg Robot's shields shatter, and it collapses to the ground. It picks itself back up, its health bar regenerates, and Ava takes the mantle for round 2. Without its shields, the robot is taking quite the beating from Ava, but it isn't going down without a fight. It throws missiles, egg robos, energy waves, floor-destroying lasers, and fists at them. Only by carefully targeting the robot's chest, rather than its fist, is Ava able to demolition the mechanical beast. The Death Egg Robot appears to charge one last attack before its several arms go limp. Its chest begins to contract like a beating heart, shattering the glass plate covering its chest. Emerging from the cavity is a pale, multi-headed mechanical ghoul. The ghostly robot lets out a shriek, and the Phantom Ruby is heard one last time as the sky fades to black. Sonic, Classic, and Ava find themselves in a null space-like void, detached from all reality but the voices of their comrades. Sonic must dodge an onslaught of lasers as he collects the boost energy and rings needed to catch up to the robot. Classic and Ava keep up the pace, initiating follow-up attacks when the robot is caught off guard. Slowly but surely, the trio damages the robot, and when it's on its last legs, the trio initiates a triple boost. The robot is destroyed, and the virtual reality surrounding them crumples away. Each playable character gets their own stage suited to their playstyle strengths, 4 stars for level design. The first 2 stages provide a grand view of the Eggman Empire and its central tower, and the final stage is custom made for this boss battle, perfectly fitting the Phantom Ruby's vibe of surrealism, 5 stars for presentation. The dialogue at the beginning of this stage alludes to a terrifying concept. The Phantom Ruby, a weapon already capable of mass destruction at the whims of its wielder, being overclocked. But what truly speaks volume is the absence of Eggman's voice. You're no longer fighting Dr. Eggman, you're fighting the Death Egg Robot. You're no longer saving the world from the rule of a maniacal dictator. You're saving reality from the primal urge of the Phantom Ruby incarnate to destroy everything and shroud the ashes in an illusion. This is what it means to show, don't tell. 5 stars for narrative. This is the closest any boss in Sonic Forces gets to feeling like a proper Sonic boss fight. Instead of a series of homing attack indicators, there's actual fucking strategy. There's a need to memorize attack patterns and experiment with your moveset to make progress. The one major downside to this boss is that its final phase is taken from the Nega Wisp armor in Sonic Colors, but honestly, these 2 bosses are different enough in execution that they may as well be different bosses. I see the Force's Death Egg Robot as more of a pinch mode inspired by the Nega Wisp armor than a carbon copy of it, far better than the version of it that was in Sonic Lost World. 4 stars for Boss AI. The total score for Sonic Force's final boss rounds up to 5 stars. Holy shit, I did it. I reviewed and critiqued every piece of content in Sonic Forces that makes up its main campaign. This was a massive undertaking that I wasn't prepared for, one that's taken me 4 months to complete. I'm glad that we were able to end this review on a more positive note with that final boss, but the time has come to answer the questions I brought up at the beginning of the video. But before that, here's my personal ranking of all 33 main stages in Sonic Forces from worst to best. Avatar vs. Infinite, Eggman's Facility, Aqua Road vs. Zavok, Tag Team vs. Infinite, Final Judgment, Red Gate Bridge, Ghost Town vs. Eggman, Green Hill, Motor Canyon, Guardian Rock, Metropolitan Highway, Luminous Forest, Sunset Heights, Virtual Reality, Lost Valley, Chemical Plant, Park Avenue, Casino Forest, Death Egg, Iron Fortress, No Space, Arsenal Pyramid, Imperial Tower, Spaceport, Modern vs. Infinite, Prison Hall, Network Terminal, Enemy Territory, Capital City, Egg Gate vs. Death Egg Robot. This video has taught me a lot about writing, editing, and overall video production. This video helped me escape my writer's block and enjoy content creation again. But more importantly, how has this video affected my opinions on Sonic Forces 2017? Well, I think there's a couple of factors to consider. 1. Is Sonic Forces worth replaying in 2024? 2. Do I enjoy Sonic Forces as a product? And 3. How has my opinion on Sonic Forces shifted between the conception of this video and now? In 2022, I ended my Sonic Colors video with a lesson, that it's okay for our opinions on games to change over time, because our first impressions aren't always accurate. This was the lesson I took away from my experience of learning to love Colors, after years of considering it to be against the things that Sonic should stand for. Logically, the same would be true in reverse. After covering nearly everything Sonic Forces has to offer, I now understand that Sonic Forces is the game I should have been directing those criticisms towards. Despite generally disliking the flat writing and blocky Mario-inspired platforming of Sonic Colors, Sonic Forces is not an inherently better game just because I enjoy its approach more. What Colors may lack in ambition, it more than makes up for in earnesty. Sonic Colors had something to say about our world, and about the platformer genre, and though Sonic Forces may be more captivating in its narrative and medium, though it may be more ambitious, technically speaking, it's a soulless, spineless product, designed to appear as though it takes risks and pushes the franchise forward, when in reality it's all smoke and mirrors. And though I claimed to play the game ironically for years, I've fallen for its tactics all the same. Sonic Forces is a video game worth revisiting in the current year. It's a prime example of what not to do when designing a Sonic game. It's only an hour long, and one of the more polished games in the series, so it'd certainly be no chore to play through unlike certain other entries. But if you're willing to take a look beyond the surface, you may just find yourself appreciating the highs of this franchise all the more. Or maybe your opinion on Forces and the Sonic series as a whole will remain unchanged. At least you have the satisfaction of knowing you went in with an open mind, and a willingness to have your opinions challenged for the sake of an honest, intellectual conversation. Though I've certainly gotten more than enough hours out of Sonic Forces to justify the $30 I've spent on it between the 2 copies I own, playtime alone does not a good game make. The dishonesty surrounding its marketing, the game's inability to commit to ideas, and its general disinterest in the source material and fanbase make this game a greedy cash grab. Certainly not the worst one in series history, but for a completely original title, I just cannot justify spending any amount of money on this game. Well, there is the modding community, but that's not a point towards Sonic Team. I have no respect for Sonic Forces as a product, and cannot recommend spending money on this title for any reason other than to experience the work of the talented modding community. Just wait for the game to drop to $10. I started this project as a fan of Sonic Forces. Ironic or not, I did find genuine enjoyment in the simple gameplay loop and the unintentionally hilarious plot. I think I still find enjoyment in these aspects of Forces, even after experiencing more of Sonic's lineage. Covering the entire story of the game, word for word, made me aware of the shocking compliance the series had in defiling and erasing its own history back then, and though Sonic Forces seemed to be a step forward in terms of stakes and scope, it's the worst offender of all in the end, leaving no stone unturned when it comes to shaping its past in a way that it thought would be most beneficial to its sales. Deconstructing the stages of the game made me realize how little thought went into its formula. Rather than treating the art of level design as a journey for players to take, they treat it as the means to an end. Levels exist only to push you forward to the goal, while mouthpieces talk your ear off with exposition. Conversely, cutscenes exist to drag the characters into the starting position of the following stage by crafting a sequence of events and excuses for the game to continue, masked by incoherent strings of words structured like a story. Sonic Forces is systematically designed to inch the player closer to the end credits, with no regard for thrilling level design, engaging world building, or meaningful narratives. Because as long as you beat Sonic Forces, Sega wins. They get to keep your money, and they profit off of your sales. In a financial report by Sega in February of 2018, Sega stated that Sonic Forces performed strongly. Not that it pushed the gameplay formula forward, or advanced the world and characters of the franchise in a meaningful way. It simply performed strongly. It made its money, and as far as Sega is concerned, it fulfilled its sole purpose for existence. Sonic Forces was a success. This is what I meant when I said that Sonic Forces could have killed the franchise at the beginning of the video. Maybe Sonic the Hedgehog would continue to see new releases and strong sales, but in a world where Sonic Team went into Sonic Frontiers without a vision and without heart, we'd be living in a sea of soulless corporate slop designed to perform strongly, and the platformer genre would be worse for it. There's this concept in critique called comfortable mediocrity. It's when a piece of media is bland, safe, and predictable, yet you find a sense of joy in its simplistic charm. There are two platformers I often use as an example of comfortable mediocrity: New Super Mario Bros. U and Kirby Star Allies. New Soup U is a game which everyone agrees is monotonous slop, yet everyone still bought it because it's a 2D Mario game with fun controls, power-ups, and side modes. Kirby Star Allies is different in the fact that while its gameplay is also mediocre when compared to what came before it, it also makes strides to build on the lore of the series and represent fans of every era. Star Allies is a good fan service game, but you'll be hard pressed to find two people who can agree on the overall quality of the game. Perhaps it would be better to refer to this type of game as divisive mediocrity, a game that embraces mediocrity in one or more areas to reserve its resources for a particular niche within a fandom. Sonic Forces was designed with a broader goal in mind, using nostalgia to appeal to as many Sonic fans as humanly possible in order to maximize profits. Sonic Forces is a divisive video game, but it also has a general consensus that nearly everyone agrees with. Sonic Forces is a bad video game. So what do you call a game that should, in theory, appeal to fans of all walks of life, but fails to please anyone in practice? A game so determined to be bland, safe, and predictable that in the process it distorts itself into an aggressively soulless, disrespectful, and cynical product. A game that leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth, be you a fan or a critic. This is Sonic Forces, a game that reeks of uncomfortable mediocrity.